This is a compilation of the stories behind 8 hugely popular Irish songs. These are all parts of the ongoing project I've been working on for the last year, where I want to collect all the interesting and lesser known stories behind the songs that we all know and love. If this is your first time to the channel, there's plenty to learn. If you've been here before, then you might stumble across a video or two that you've already seen. Combining the videos into a large compilation like this just makes for an easier viewing experience to catch up on everything in one space. So grab yourself a cup of tea, coffee, whiskey, or all three. Throw this video up in the background, whatever suits you, but I hope you enjoy. The first one up is the tragic story behind the song There Were Roses, exploring the troubles in Ireland and how 2 friends, a Protestant and a Catholic, sadly lost their lives as a result of the sectarian violence in the region at the time. During the Troubles in Ireland, the south countryside of County Down in 1973 wasn't like the city wars up in Belfast. Forget the brick-to-brick fighting up there. This was a war fought on the back roads, between hedgerows and across fields. The Ryan Road, a winding lane near Mayo Bridge and Newry, cut right through a tight-knit farming community. No peace walls here, just ditches and shared fences. Protestants and Catholics were literally next door neighbours. They were close. Real close. By day, everything looked normal. Farmers swapped gear, they met at the local creamery, they drove the same narrow lanes to town. But once the sun went down, the area changed completely. The Ryan Road became a danger zone. No streetlights meant that every approaching car's headlights were a major toss-up. Is it security forces or a sectarian hit squad? To survive, you had to be hyper-aware, reading the land for anything out of place, a strange car or a sudden silence even. By 1973, the conflict had devolved into a gruesome practice called tit for tat. The old civil rights dreams were long gone, replaced by a simple, terrifying scorekeeping. Kill a Protestant, a Catholic had to die to even it up. Kill a Catholic, a Protestant had to go down as well. The individual didn't matter. The label did. It wasn't about strategy anymore. It was like a conversation of blood between paramilitaries, with ordinary people as the unwilling punctuation marks. The air around Newry was thick with a specific suffocating dread. The official death count shows a non-stop string of killings. The violence was incredibly personal. A murder in Belfast was a headline. One in Newry was the funeral you attended with your neighbours. The fear was up close and personal. It sat with you at breakfast and rode shotgun in your car. The army was everywhere, but they couldn't control the night. British Army checkpoints created traffic jams of delays and interrogations. Armoured vehicles lumbered along the main roads. Helicopters provided a constant pulsing background noise over the border, the place the military nicknamed Bandit Country. But for all the hardware, the gunmen moved like ghosts on the back lanes. The constant tension took a massive toll. Trust evaporated. You'd eye a neighbour's glance, wondering if they were watching you. A car slowing down outside your farmhouse at 2 a.m. brought on full-blown panic. This was the era of the no-warning attack. No knock, just a kick to the front door or a burst of gunfire through the windshield. The folks on the Ryan Road were basically holding their breath, waiting for the inevitable to arrive. The tit-for-tat cycle was a never-ending death engine. It meant you didn't have to be a fighter to be a target. For loyalist groups like the UVF and the Glenanne Gang down in South Down, the entire Catholic population was a target pool. Likewise for the IRA in South Armagh. Any Protestant with any link, however small, to the state was fair game. This logic completely dehumanized people. A man stopped being a dad, a musician, or a farmer. He was just a counter in a sectarian trade. The killings were like billboards. A murder was a message sent to the other side, with the victim's body as the communication medium. In 1973, this awful conversation essentially reached a peak in the border areas. The Newry murders weren't random. They were specific sentences in a long, bloody story written that summer. In a conflict where the government spun the official story and paramilitaries made anonymous calls, the songwriter became the best recording of the events. The news gave you the statistics. A 41-year-old man, a 21-year-old civilian. It never really told you who they were. The folk tradition in Ireland has always been an unofficial archive. In the 1970s, musicians in County Down stepped up as oral historians documenting the real human cost of the Troubles. They remembered the names that official history would forget. They recorded the exact painful geography of the loss. Tommy Sands, a Ryan Road local and part of the successful Sands family folk group, lived this role. He wasn't an outsider looking in. He was writing from the absolute centre of the chaos. His song, There Were Roses, is essentially a primary source document, a forensic record of a specific friendship and a specific summer set to music. Sands understood that the real tragedy wasn't just the straight-up war between two sides, but the shattering of connections between neighbours who, in any sane world, would have stayed friends. The Sands family home on the Ryan Road was a ceilidh house. In rural Ireland, that means an open-door place where people gather to play music, tell stories and catch up. In 1973, the Sands kitchen was a safe haven. It was a no-go zone for sectarianism. The whole point of the ceilidh house was inclusivity. Protestant and Catholic farmers, who might have eyed each other warily at an army checkpoint, sat shoulder to shoulder in the Sands kitchen. The music, the fiddles and accordions drowned out all that political nonsense.
Well, I grew up on a small farm, as I say, and we were surrounded by neighbours of all religions. Well, actually, there's only two.
Sands recalls it as a place where Protestant and Catholic neighbours called in on their ceilidh with his parents, Mick and Bridie. The music was the ticket in, and its value held firm on both sides of the divide. The actual roses that are mentioned in Sands' song were right there too. They grew in an arch over a seat outside the house. They bloomed in the summer of 73. Silent witnesses to the coming and going of men who would soon be dead. The image of the roses is a powerful contrast to the violence, a stubborn natural beauty that couldn't care less about the human disaster unfolding beneath it. The unofficial archive musicians, like the Sands family, were the keepers of the community's memory. They channeled the trauma into the tune. When Sands finally wrote There Were Roses, a decade later, he was opening that community archive. This musical history captures details that official reports always miss. It gets the sound of the laughter on the road. It nails the exact fear of the car prowling. It captures the victim's desperate last-minute plea. It turns the cold statistic back into a person. The story of the Ryan Road murders centres on the bond between two men, Isaac Scott and Sean McDonnell. The song calls them Alan Bell and Sean O'Malley, but their real lives are documented. They were neighbours and friends, the perfect representation of the Ryan Road's mixed heritage. Isaac Scott was Protestant, and Sean McDonnell was Catholic. In the super polarised climate of 1973, their friendship was like an act of quiet rebellion. It wasn't a grand political gesture, it was just a natural relationship born of living in the same place. They ploughed the same soil, dealt with the same weather, and hung out at the same ceilidh house. Sands himself confirms that they were both good friends of his.
Someone said, no matter how close the troubles get to us, the wind changes. We're friends, we know each other, we work in the fields together. But 1 year from that day, things had changed. Songs with two people came to our house.
This was a three-way friendship, grounded in the area's social life and music. The relationship proves that the sectarian hate driving the war wasn't inherent to the people. It was something forced upon them from the outside. Isaac and Sean didn't hate or fear each other. They genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Their relationship was the norm on the Ryan Road, a norm the gunmen were hell-bent on destroying. The Alan Bell in the song, or Isaac Scott, was 41 years old in the summer of 1973. He lived in Beena, right over the fields from the Sands family. He had two key identities. To his neighbours, Isaac was a musician. He was a great man for the music and the dancing and the reels. He played in bands and loved the local dances and was a vibrant, essential part of the music scene. He played in bands and loved the local dances and was a vibrant, essential part of the social scene. He was totally woven into the community fabric. If you look up Isaac Scott in the Kane archive, and also in the book Lost Lives by David McKittrick, you get a quick glimpse back into time. To quote from Lost Lives, entry number 896, Isaac Scott, Armagh, civilian, Protestant, 41, single. 9th of July 1973, a former member of the UDR, He was shot by the IRA at Beleek near Newtown, Hamilton, as he started his car after leaving Tully's, the village pub. Another man was seriously injured in the shooting. The gun attack happened just after midnight. Isaac Scott and a woman having just got into his car when shots were fired through the windscreen, killing him instantly. It emerged some time after his death that Isaac Scott, who came from Mayobridge, was a former member of 3 UDR in County Down. His woman companion told the inquest she did not know if anyone in the bar knew he had been in the UDR, or that he was a Protestant. The following month, a Catholic man, Charles J. McDonnell, was shot dead nearby in an apparent reprisal. For Republican paramilitaries, a past or present link to the UDR marked a man as a combatant. They didn't see the neighbour who ended up playing the accordion. They saw the uniform that he used to wear. This split was the lethal catch-22 of his life. He was killed not for who he was to his friends, but for what he stood for to his enemies. The Sean O'Malley in the song is referred to as Sean McDonnell in other versions of the song. The differences in names is worth mentioning real quick. From what I could gather, when Tommy Sands originally wrote the song, he did have the real names of the men in the song, with permission from the families of course. However, near the last minute, there was an understandable change and it was decided to change the names of the men in the song to something else to protect the families. However, in more recent years, the real names of the men are often sung instead because there isn't a threat anymore of the violence that ran rampant through the north of Ireland. Now please correct me in the comments if I got anything mixed up here. Going from the Isaac Scott, in the book Lost Lives, it mentions that Charles J. McDonnell was murdered in retaliation. The song mentions Sean, but just because I'm referring to the Lost Lives book and the Kane archives, I'm going to refer to Sean as Charles for a minute. Charles was 20 years old. Though he came from South Armagh, a Republican stronghold essentially, his focus was entirely on civilian life. He was a heavy plant driver, a young man just starting out. Sean was serious about a young woman named Agnes O'Hare, the Alice in the song. She was the centre of his world. They were planning a wedding for 1974. They spent their evenings together on the quiet roads around Newry and Mayobridge, often stopping in at Sands' house. Unlike Isaac, Sean had zero connection to the security forces. He wasn't in the IRA, he wasn't a political activist, he was a civilian through and through. His identity as a Catholic was the only reason the loyalists picked him. He was chosen not for anything he had done, but simply just to balance the books after Isaac's death. To quote the Lost Lives book, entry number 924, August 22nd, 1973. Charles J. McDonnell, County Down, civilian, Catholic, 20, single, from Carrowman and Beleek. He was shot in the head and chest after being abducted by armed and masked UDA-UFF men from outside his fiance's home. The couple were sitting in a car when the gang ordered him out, drove him a short distance away, then shot him 11 times from close range. As the gunmen took him away, they told his fiancée, "This is for Isaac Scott." The shooting took place not far from the Mayobridge home of Isaac Scott, who had been shot dead the previous month. Charles McDonnell's 18-year-old fiancée gave evidence at the inquest. She said, "We went to bingo and had just got home at 11:30 p.m. We were sitting talking about the wedding next year when a car drew up behind us. We didn't take any notice of it because I thought it was my brother coming home. Suddenly, the door burst open and the gunmen wearing masks ordered Charles out. They took me to go inside and the last I saw of Charles was when they bundled him into the back seat of the car. He didn't do anybody any harm. What am I going to do without him?" A man calling himself Captain Black of the UFF called a Belfast newspaper and accepted responsibility for the McDonnell murder. A detective told the inquest no one had been charged with the killing. See also Isaac Scott, entry number 896. After the murder of Isaac Scott, the Catholic community on the Ryan Road lived in absolute terror. They knew the score was uneven. This waiting period was often worse than the violence itself. It changed how everyone in the district lived. Men stopped leaving the house at night. Families slept in interior rooms away from the road. The sound of a car engine became a clear threat. Sands writes, "Now fear it filled the countryside. There was fear in every home. This fear wasn't imagined. It was entirely logical. Loyalist death squads were on the move. They were prowling, a word that perfectly captures their predatory patrols. They were hunting for their payment." One book gives a very close account of the details and albeit shocking. The book, The Killing of the Reevy Brothers by Ken Murray and Eugene Reevy. In this book he is referred to as Sean, and in one chapter it says, Sean and Agnes came home from bingo and turned down the Ryan Road where Agnes lived. They had stopped at Agnes' driveway and chatted about their wedding plans, but unknown to them, two people had climbed a tree beside the house and were waiting for their car to arrive. When it did, the two up the tree shone a light as a signal to start the hit. As Sean and Agnes chatted, two vehicles, which were seen to be driving around the local area earlier, pulled up behind, and then Sean was dragged from the car. One of the gunmen said to Agnes, "This is for Isaac Scott." Sean was driven up down the Ryan Road in Mayo Bridge for about a mile, close to where Isaac lived. The car pulled into the gateway, and Sean was pulled out of the car and put standing at a gatepost at Heslop's farm before being shot 11 times by a Sterling 9mm submachine gun. This was a standard British Army weapon at the time. Later, a burned out Ford Escort had been found around the laneway. It was stolen in Banbridge earlier. Sean's brother Gerard had told the author of the book in mention many years later that Sean's teeth were removed before he was shot. It seemed that they were trying to get information out of him, but Sean was just the wrong man to be asking. Himself and his family were never involved in any criminal or paramilitary activity. A doctor, Michael McVerry from Newry, had mentioned that Sean's death lasted 5 to 7 hours. Absolutely horrific. Somebody in the comments of one of my other videos, I think it was the one about Grace being the saddest Irish song, they mentioned that this song, There Were Roses, is the most heartbreaking. And when I started reading about it, finding the Lost Lives book, the Kane archive, the numbers, the amount of entries in the Lost Lives book, the killing of the Reevy brothers as well, it just got darker and harder to read the more I got into it. When I think of Sean McDonald in this story, I'm just lost for words. His family, his young fiancée, he was so young and he had his whole life ahead of him. When you really stop to reflect on this time, the troubles in Ireland, it was truly awful in every sense. I grew up not far from this area, and now I was so young that I don't remember a lot, to be honest. But I do remember walking around town and suddenly having to go home a few times because there was a bomb scare or something like that. I remember this 5-year-old me walking around and looking at these black plastic bags on the ground, obviously just rubbish, but me thinking that there was a bomb inside it. Now, I don't have much experience of the troubles myself, so reading about stories like Sean McDonald here just shocks me to my core, honestly. It's hard not to feel emotional about it. Sean McDonald was, by all accounts, an exceptionally innocent young man, as noted by Ken Murray in his book. Diligent and quiet, he helped his father Charlie on the family farm. His life revolved around the GAA, his work and his girlfriend, with no apparent interest in political matters or worries beyond his path in life. The ballistic analysis of Sean's murder revealed that the weapon used was connected to 4 other recent loyalist paramilitary shootings. Their victims included not only Sean, but also the Reevies and many other innocent people. In time, it became more obvious that a sinister force was operating in mid-Ulster, comprising loyalist paramilitaries and the shadowy elements of the British state. RUC officer John Lindsay, accompanied by Constable Billy McBride, was among those sent to investigate Sean's killings. McBride was later identified as a gunsmith in an Irish government report by Judge Henry Barron. He was implicated, along with others, in supplying weapons to the UVF in Portadown. McBride lived in Bena, near Isaac Scott's home. The heart of the Ryan Road tragedy is the friendship between the two dead men. Sean McDonald was not Isaac Scott's enemy, he was his friend. Sands captures this irony in the song's most gut-wrenching line.
Alan was my friend, he cried, he begged them with his feet. Centuries faded, years that cannot heal.
Whether Sean literally said those words is less important than the truth that they carry behind it. He was killed by men claiming to act for Isaac. Yet, by killing Sean, they destroyed Isaac's friend. The violence just consumed itself. The eye for an eye philosophy resulted in the moral blindness of the whole community. Tommy Sands didn't write the song right away. The pain was just too fresh. The community was still too shell-shocked. It took a full decade for the experience to become art. Sands wrote There Were Roses in the mid-1980s, Looking back at the summer of 1973 with a clear, painful distance, when Sands was ready to record the song for his 1985 album, Singing of the Times, he faced a tough decision. He wanted to use the real names, Isaac and Sean, to honour his friends. He got the family's permission, like I mentioned, but right before the release, one family changed their mind. The fear of attracting attention, of inviting more violence or vandalism, was still too real, which, from what we went over in the video, you can completely understand. These fake names allowed the true story to be told without putting the living in danger. It was a necessary act of protective fiction. After the Good Friday Agreement, once the immediate threat of violence lifted, the truth started to re-emerge. Singers like Cara Dillon began performing the song using the men's real names, Isaac Scott and Sean McDonnell. This act restored the history to the men who lived it. This is what makes folk songs stand out from the rest. It's not just a song to listen to for background noise or entertainment primarily. For There Were Roses, it makes the listener remember that the victims of the Troubles weren't abstract political symbols. They were normal people who danced, planned weddings, went to bingo, and ultimately, who were friends. This song does an absolutely perfect job at making you feel that emotion, that anger, that frustration. It's the perfect rebel song. It's got an amazing story behind it, The Patriot Game, written by the famous Dominic Behan. Released in 1958, it is framed around the first-person perspective of a Fergal O'Hanlon, a real-life IRA volunteer from Monaghan Town. The song itself has a great story buried in it, and a bit of controversy as well. Did Bob Dylan actually plagiarise the song to write his own? I'll let you be the judge of that. So the song itself, as I said, is framed around this first-person view of a Fergal O'Hanlon, who he said was an IRA lad. I personally love the opening lines of this song. It's even making me feel a bit rebellious already, like, "Come all ye young rebels and list while I sing. For love of one's land is a terrible thing." You imagine back then the anger that people felt, the strong beliefs of a large portion of that population. This song opens with such a strong line that hits that very nerve, that being proud of your country is a terrible thing. I think it's one of the most perfect examples of how strong a writer Dominic Behan was. I actually think as well that we could incite another rebellion if we do our own version of the song today. "Come all ye young rebels and list while I sing. For the love of cheap rent and a pint under a fiver, and reasonably priced petrol is a terrible thing." We can only dream. But joking aside, Fergal was a real person. He was born in Monaghan, which is right on the border there between the north of Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. The song says that he was 16 and that it was barely 2 years since he joined the IRA. But why the need for the IRA in the first place, and what was the crack in Ireland back then? Well, the fighting that kicked off between the 1940s and 1960s was all down to the IRA's long-standing obsession with ending the partition of Ireland. That line in the sand drawn by the 1922 Anglo-Irish Treaty. At the start, the lads wanted to take down both Northern Ireland and the Irish Free State, because in their eyes, both were just illegitimate setups forced on us by the British. And at the end of the song though, we know that Fergal dies. However, the real Fergal was 20 years old. He was nearly 21 years old when he was killed. So does the younger age make this song hit even harder? In a way it does. I think it does. It shows an image of essentially a 14-year-old joining the IRA to fight and being killed when he was 16. This isn't uncommon as well with a lot of rebel songs. The point is to trigger an emotion with the listener, and reshaping Fergal as a younger lad, in my opinion, definitely helps hit that nerve a little bit easier. It's more shocking. Whether that was Dominic's intention or not, to me it doesn't really matter. Whether Fergal himself wasn't 16 or not, the reality is that many unknown younger kids had died throughout those years for various reasons, so it doesn't make that struggle any less real. But how did Fergal die? He was killed on January 1st, 1957, during an IRA raid on the Royal Ulster Constabulary Barracks in Brookborough, County Fermanagh, an operation in which fellow volunteer Sean South also lost his life, who another great song was written about as well, Sean South of Garryowen. But that raid, there's a few interesting things to know about it. It was carried out on the 1st of January 1957, as we mentioned, It was the day that Fergal had died. It was considered the most dramatic attack of the IRA's border campaign for several reasons. They actually attacked the wrong building as well to begin with. A 14-man IRA column led by Sean Garland had intended to attack a joint RUC and B Specials barracks in County Fermanagh, but completely mixed it up and attacked the wrong one. Now, I couldn't find what building it was mixed up with, but it was probably just a different section of the barracks. That's just my guess there though. Not only was there a major tactical error with the building, the fighting was brief too. They were heavily armed, had a load of grenades and firebombs on them, but the fighting only lasted about 10 minutes. After the fighting was done, the IRA lads were hunted down, injured and all. The surviving men tried to escape back across the border, but were being hunted by 400 RUC officers, B Specials and British soldiers. This retreat was where the 20-year-old Fergal O'Hanlon and Sean South had died from their wounds sustained in the fighting. The deaths of Sean and Fergal in particular triggered an emotional reaction amongst the public in the Republic of Ireland. They became martyrs and around 50,000 people attended the funerals. The events inspired many songs to be written, these two included, and remembered to this day. There's a physical memorial dedicated to both Sean South and Fergal O'Hanlon located at Altwall Cross in Fermanagh, which you can still visit. Sadly, it's also a spot where vandalism seems to occur more than once, similar to the Luke Kelly statues in Dublin. Now, Dominic Behan, we'll have a little talk about himself and the famous Behan family soon, but the song, the melody, how was it written? He wrote the lyrics, and they're amazing lyrics at that. Impossible not to have vivid imagery listening to them. He didn't compose the original melody. As with a ton of folk songs, not only Irish, the tune was borrowed from an older tune called One Morning in May, or The Nightingale. According to the folk indexes as well, it also goes by the name The Bold Grenadier and The Merry Month of May. So the melody at least has been there for a good while. But these older songs, combined with the Patriot Game, creates a little layer of irony. The English folk songs revolve around a romantic encounter between a soldier and a young lady walking down by a stream to hear the nightingale sing. The soldier, fair dues to him, he whips out his fiddle and plays her a tune. She's loving the tune now as well, so she is. So she turns around and asks him to marry him. But the sneaky fecker tells her that he already has a wife at home. Bad form. But compare that to the Patriot Game, a young IRA volunteer dying in a fight against British forces, set to the same melody as a cheeky British soldier's romantic exploits. Pure brilliant. But now, here's where we get on to the bit about Bob Dylan. Did he plagiarise it from Behan? Tell me what you think about it though. From what I read, there's a fair bit of debate for and against it, understandably as well. But it's undoubtedly the same melody, which is fair because the melody, as we said, has been going around for ages. So for that reason, it's not fair to say that Bob Dylan had plagiarised it because, sure, you know, it's a traditional folk tune. Behan did the same thing, of course. But where it gets complicated is the lyrics and the framework. That for what Behan did for Fergal O'Hanlon fighting with the IRA for the reasons that we mentioned earlier, Bob Dylan's lyrics do a similar thing for the American people. I'm not really familiar with Bob Dylan's song now. I didn't go investigating it that much, and I only have a very basic understanding of American history. But from what I can see in the songs, they open with a similar narrative, and each verse as well ends in a similar fashion. Part of the Patriot Game and God on their side. And it's repeated. It's hard to say exactly, of course. It's absolutely open for debate. I would say though that, look, you know, you can't argue about using that melody. That's fair game. But it gets a bit questionable when the theme and the framework and the narrative combined are also a little bit similar. That it could be safe to say that Bob Dylan did take some inspiration from Dominic Behan's Patriot Game. But please do let us all know what you think about it down in the comments. But Dominic Behan anyway, and the Behan family, a huge part of Irish folk music for many reasons, a family of excellent writers at the time. Dominic was born in Dublin on October 22nd, 1928. The Behan family were your usual educated working class family, immersed in Irish Republican politics and literature. Stephen Behan was his father, and he himself fought with the IRA in the Irish War of Independence. Kathleen Behan, his mother, was a politically active collector of songs and stories who frequently took her kids on literary tours of the city. As well as that, Dominic Behan's uncle, Patrick Carney, wrote a soldier song, the basis of the Irish national anthem. So arguably one of, if not the most important family when it comes to the music of Ireland. It's worth mentioning as well that Dominic had a number of hugely popular songs written. I'm going to throw them up here on the screen somewhere, and as well I'll leave the links down in the description below. But yeah, he was one of several children. One to mention real quick, which I'm sure you know, Brendan Behan, who had also written the song The Owl Triangle. But Dominic left school at the age of 13 to work as a house painter, following in his father's footsteps. Around the same time, the family packed up and moved to Crumlin. He joined the ranks of the Fianna Éireann. These were the IRA's youth wing. And this was the spot where he first started getting his poems and prose out there for the world to see. His strong beliefs and his commitment to the working man ended up getting him into a wee bit of trouble there with the law in Dublin in 1952. He ended up getting himself jailed for heading up a civil disobedience campaign, which was a protest against the government because they weren't doing a tap about the high unemployment or the way the working class were being treated at the time. Hang on, what year is it now? That sounds very familiar. But I won't go into too much more detail about what he did really in general, because he truly did have an up and down life. There's so much to talk about. But he lived until he was 60 years old, and he had died of pancreatic cancer in the end. It's truly awful. My father-in-law went the same way, and yeah, it's rough. Cancer fucking sucks. But I hope that section gave a little bit more insight about Dominic Behan. But you can imagine how all of that was channeled into his writing and his writing of the Patriot Game. But real quick as well, as great as they were, the Clancy brothers, they had admitted one time in an interview that they do go and change the songs to suit their audience. Because rightly said, if you don't have an audience, you're not really a performer, an entertainer. You're not a band. In their case.
Well, of course, all music is like language. It's a changing, living thing, and it keeps sort of evolving and changing and adapting to its new environment. Well, and we did that with folk music. And one of the factors involved was the fact that we started in America. And when we got up to sing some of our Irish songs, we realized that Americans wouldn't understand half what we were saying. The same as some of the Scots songs. I mean, they're not immediately understandable to people outside Scotland. So we just changed them to make them understood by our audience. And I think the fact that we had been in theatre taught us the lesson that if your audience do not understand you, you're a dead duck no matter what you're doing.
Exactly, that's true.
But they had changed the lyrics in this song and omitted some politically sensitive verses from the recordings. And while I do understand the Clancy brothers' point, I wouldn't be performing a song and changing the lyrics or leaving bits out, especially when it's so closely linked with history. You may as well just write a whole new song on the back of that melody. But back to the song anyway, the middle verses. Connolly being shot, why is De Valera to blame? John Bull, the war lackey police force. What does all of this mean? Well, the line for a start, they told me how Connolly was shot in the chair. This kind of starts it all off. Connolly was a leader of the 1916 Rising, and he was severely wounded afterwards. When he was executed as well, he couldn't stand up, so he was tied to a chair and executed. It's truly gruesome. But connected to the previous verse where he taught all his life that cruel England was to blame, this is part of that, along with the 6 counties taken from the rest of Ireland, John Bull's monarchy. And John Bull here is like the British Uncle Sam, the personification of England. But throughout Fergal's life, the song is saying that he was just raised to be aware of all of these things. But these were the few verses that echoed that. The need to fight for your country was growing over such a long time for Fergal O'Hanlon. But the bit where De Valera is greatly to blame, what's that all about? And still, De Valera is greatly to blame for shirking his part in the Patriot Game. De Valera was an early Republican leader who opposed the Anglo-Irish Treaty. He eventually formed Fianna Fáil, but once he was in power, he took strict action against the IRA, banning the organisation in 1936. Most importantly for this song, during the 1950s border campaign, the conflict in which Fergal O'Hanlon died, any suspects that were part of it were allowed to be arrested with no evidence. Hundreds were locked up right away, and making it impossible for the IRA to maintain the momentum of their campaign. And this is one of the bits as well that the Clancy brothers had left out when they recorded their own version. This is tied in with the next verse, that the police are lackeys for war and never guardians of peace. Now on Wikipedia it mentions that this Guardians of Peace bit of the song, this is talking about the An Garda Síochána, because that's like the translation from the Irish to English. Guardians of Peace. But I'm not entirely sure of that. You let me know your thoughts down in the comments about it, because maybe I was reading it wrong. But surely I think it's talking about the RUC, as that's who Fergal and the IRA was kind of up against, that they're just there to make sure that the 6 counties stay in Britain's hands, and anyone who opposes them will be shot down, essentially. They're not there to police things, they're just there as their own lackeys of war, essentially. That's my view of this part anyway of the song. But I don't know where that reference to An Garda Síochána is coming from. Maybe it's like a comparison or something like that. Like An Garda Síochána are famous for being unarmed, except for the armed section of them, of course, right? But the police in Ireland are essentially unarmed, whilst the police force up the north, especially at the time, were heavily armed and militarised, carrying submachine guns on them, assault rifles, travelling around in armoured vehicles. But maybe it's the comparison between them, that the RUC weren't there to protect civilians. They weren't civilian peacekeepers, but militarised lackeys for war who were legitimate targets. But let me know what you think anyway. But the final verse, I did give it away at the beginning. I'm sorry about that. And if you've heard the song, you know what the ending is anyway. But Fergal O'Hanlon lies there, shot, dying. We know that the brief attack he took part in, he was part of the initial survivors who fled, and then he died when he was retreating. The song mentions him lying there, which really gives you more of an insight to the imagery of the song. Like, think about it. In the beginning, he is telling the rebels to come and listen. He is 16 years old, from Monaghan. And now it says that he's lying here, body full of holes. So the song is basically him telling us his story as he lies there dying in those brief moments. It changes it from the opening of imagining him sitting down, other young lads around him talking about the story, telling him a story about how he came to be here, to actually it's his final thoughts to himself about how it all came to this point, lying on the ground, dying and shot. But rather than regretting the sacrifice, his final thoughts are the traitors who bargained and sold, who betrayed the Republican cause, that he wishes that the rifle had have exacted the same revenge upon those traitors as theirs have inflicted upon him. The Quislings who sold out to the Patriot Game. Quislings here is a word for a traitor who collaborates with an enemy force occupying their country. It's hard not to empathise with Fergal O'Hanlon, and with many others as well who have fought and lost their lives throughout the years. It's hard not to feel the anger that Dominic wanted you to feel in listening to this song. It's a perfect song, linked with history and with a bit of controversy attached to it too. What if I told you that Ireland's national anthem, Our Navian, was originally written in English, drafted on copybook paper in a Dublin cafe? The tune provoked British authorities who quickly confiscated it as seditious material. It later echoed across the battlefields of the Civil War, sung fiercely by opposing factions. The Irish translation that we recognise today, forged by prisoners locked inside a Welsh internment camp, the song's fractured legacy still reverberates today, forcing some Irish national sports teams to perform 2 distinct anthems before a match begins. This is the history of the Soldier's Song. The story of the Irish national anthem traces back to Dublin, right around 1909 or early 1910. It started with 2 childhood friends and neighbours, Patrick Kearney, who handled the lyrics, and Patrick Heaney, who composed the melody. Kearney famously drafted the original words by hand on plain copybook paper, sitting inside the Swiss Cafe at the corner of O'Connell and North Earl Street. Heaney, meanwhile, worked out that rousing tune on a melodeon. They built the song out of a brewing desire for revolution. Kearney and Heaney deliberately crafted a rebel anthem to exhort the Irish people to rise up and shatter British hegemony. With its descriptive imagery and patriotic passion, the piece was always intended to be an unifying rallying cry. One publication actually rejected the text initially, but it eventually made it to print in 1912. The Irish volunteers quickly adopted it as a marching song, and its legendary status was permanently cemented when rebels sang it from inside the GPO during the 1916 Easter Rising. A Soldier's Song was written and titled entirely in English. Kearney and Heaney penned it that way simply because English was their everyday primary language growing up in Dublin. Even the musical style leans into that influence. Critics frequently point out how closely the melody resembles an Edwardian English musical hall tune or a standard British military march. The iconic Irish translation, Our Navian, came later courtesy of Liam O'Rinn. He reportedly began translating the English lyrics while locked inside the Frongach internment camp in Wales after the 1916 Rising. O'Rinn focused heavily on capturing the living vernacular of the Irish language. Ultimately, it was his translated version that captured the nation's heart, leading the Irish Free State to officially adopt it in 1926. Liam O'Rinn, who later became the chief translator of the Oireachtas, tackled the project out of sheer frustration. By 1923, several Irish translations were already circulating, but O'Rinn found them unreadable because they relied on stiff classical Irish. He demanded a translation that reflected the living, spoken vernacular of the Gaeltacht. Despite Irish actually being his second language, O'Rinn took bold creative liberties, and at the same time, some native speakers at the time felt his translation was slightly inelegant. He dropped the literal English opening, "Soldiers are we," in favour of Sinn Fianna Fáil, translated as "Soldier's Destiny," which subtly toned down the original song's militancy. He published this accessible Munster Irish version in the Freeman's Journal in April 1923. The approach worked perfectly. During the 1930s, the Gaelic Athletic Association, or the GAA, began printing his exact lyrics in their Croke Park match programmes. They encouraged the massive crowds to sing along, permanently cementing O'Rinn's text as the undisputed national anthem. Following the 1916 Easter Rising, Ireland plunged into a prolonged era of intense turmoil. The nation endured the brutal War of Independence from 1919 to 1921, followed immediately by a bitterly divisive civil war. Throughout the chaos, the Soldier's Song served as the unofficial soundtrack to the revolution. Rebels locked away in internment camps sang it constantly. Incredibly, as the civil war raged, both the pro-treaty National Army and the anti-treaty irregulars belted out the exact same lyrics while fighting against each other. Despite its massive popularity on the ground, the new Irish Free State government actively avoided adopting an official state anthem. The country was walking a political knife edge. W.T. Cosgrave, president of the Executive Council, wanted to prevent any further controversy in the fragile aftermath of the Civil War. Ex-Unionists living in Ireland still fiercely recognised "God Save the King," mirroring the rest of the British Empire. Cosgrave feared that officially adopting a rebel song about fighting a foreign foe would severely exacerbate those local tensions. Simultaneously, the government was terrified to disown the tune entirely, knowing that their Republican opponents would immediately claim the potent symbol for themselves. Caught in this political gridlock, the public organically forced the song's recognition. A major turning point arrived on February 3rd, 1924, during a concert at Dublin's Theatre Royal. Directed by Colonel Fritz Braze, the Army Music School played a rousing encore medley of Irish patriotic airs, closing the set with the Soldier's Song. As the melody filled the room, the high-ranking dignitaries present, including President Cosgrave and the Governor-General, spontaneously stood up. That highly visible moment of respect cemented the public perception of the tune as the recognised state anthem. The final government push arrived a few years later. Concern grew that the absence of a designated anthem gave ex-Unionists an ongoing excuse to persist with "God Save the King." By 1926, foreign diplomats had also started requesting official copies of the score for international protocol. Realising the desperate need for uniformity at both home and abroad, the Executive Council officially adopted the Soldier's Song as the national anthem of Ireland on July 12, 1926. The decision was kept so quiet that days later a minister had to audibly confirm in the Dáil chamber that the state had indeed selected it, bringing the song's long journey from a handwritten cafe draft to an official national symbol to a close. But how exactly does a song become a national anthem in the first place? As legislator Thomas F. O'Higgins famously argued during a 1933 Dáil debate, anthems succeed precisely because they are, adopted generally by the nation. Regarding Ireland, he noted, the Soldier's Song succeeded because it happened to be the anthem on the lips of the people when they came into their own. Hearing that melody roar across a modern stadium offers a direct auditory link to the past. It remains a genuine rebel track, sung fiercely by the volunteers during the 1916 Easter Rising and the War of Independence. Prior to this, Irish nationalists rallied behind God Save Ireland. This was penned in 1867 to commemorate the executed Manchester martyrs. It served as the unofficial anthem for the Irish Parliamentary Party. For centuries leading up to the independence, the official state anthem remained God Save the King. Yet, God Save Ireland held de facto status until the 1916 Rising, when Sinn Féin and the Soldier's Song permanently eclipsed the old political establishment and its music. Despite its organic rise, the anthem has sparked fierce debate for decades. Musically, critics like Fintan O'Toole have mocked its style as resembling Edwardian English musehall jingoism, while politician Frank McDermott once dismissed it during a Dáil debate as a jaunty little piece of vulgarity. Lyrically, the resistance anthem faces frequent criticism for remaining overly militaristic and anti-British, specifically regarding its calls to fight the Saxon foe amid the cannon's roar. Furthermore, Liam O'Rinn's Irish translation triggered intense domestic fallout. In 1926, Eamon de Valera adopted the opening line, Sinn Fianna Fáil, as the name of his new political party. This embedded a partisan name directly into the national anthem, generating lasting resentment among political rivals. The sharpest controversy surrounds its status in Northern Ireland. Ulster Unionists strongly deprecate the anthem, viewing it strictly as a symbol of the Republic rather than the entire island. In Northern Ireland, the official anthem remains God Save the King. Historically, the Unionist government in the North viewed the Soldier's Song with such extreme hostility that they frequently invoked public order laws to ban performances, citing fears of a breach of peace. This deep cultural fracture eventually collided with the sporting world. Many of Ireland's national sports teams, most notably the international rugby squad, operate as all-island bodies fielding players from both the Republic and the North of Ireland. Demanding Unionist players from the North sing an Irish rebel song proved highly volatile. To resolve the friction ahead of the 1995 Rugby World Cup, the Irish Rugby Football Union commissioned an entirely new, inclusive anthem from composer Phil Coulter. The resulting track, Ireland's Call, was adopted to represent the unified roster. Today, during international matches hosted in the Republic, Ireland's Call is sung alongside Aaron Navian. When those same all-island teams play away from home, or in Northern Ireland, Ireland's Call echoes through the stadium entirely on its own. But what are your thoughts on it? I, for one, do like the national anthem as it is. For respecting the history of the country, it feels spot on. But in considering the beautiful music that does come out of Ireland, I do feel that it's a little bit disconnected, really. Although there's an alternate universe somewhere where Enya's Orinoco Flow is the national anthem, or even Seven Drunken Nights if we want to really play into the stereotype. That's kind of fun to imagine now. But as a big rugby fan myself, I do love when Ireland's Call is sung, and seeing the lads get so emotional as well when it's sung. I feel as well that in today's world, would it be right to say that maybe Ireland's Call resonates more with the people? Or do you think it should just be left as it is? Please do tell me in the comments what you think, or just have a bit of crack about it and suggest a good old Irish song that you would like to see take its place. World War I destroyed a generation between 1914 and 1918. Britain, France and Germany fought a brutal stalemate in the mud of Northern Europe. Over 200,000 Irish soldiers stood in those trenches wearing British uniforms. This creates a painful historical question. These men fought for the British Empire in France, while their neighbours back home fought against that same empire for independence in Dublin. They died for a king who was crushing their own revolution back home. Eric Bogle's song, The Green Fields of France, or No Man's Land as it was known as well, transports us back to this specific tragedy. It places the listener directly by a graveside in 1916. The lyrics strip away the glory and leave only the cold reality of a 19-year-old soldier named Willie McBride. It acts as a time machine, forcing us to look at one of the darkest moments in human history through the eyes of a single wasted life. But who was Eric Bogle? Eric Bogle was born on September 23rd, 1944, in Peebles in Scotland. He was a war baby, essentially, born just as the conflict in Europe was grinding towards its conclusion. He grew up in a United Kingdom defined by the long shadow of the two world wars. His father was a woodcutter who played the bagpipes, so he was exposed to music from a young age. However, his path was not initially musical. He worked as a labourer, a clerk, and a barman before emigrating to Australia in 1969 at the age of 25. By moving to Australia, Bogle placed himself in a country where the First World War, specifically the Gallipoli campaign, is often seen as essentially the birth of Australia as a nation, even though they were a nation since 1901. Yet, as a Scot, he remained an observer, almost like an outsider elite in the folk scene. He was culturally Scottish, but geographically removed from the United Kingdom, allowing him to view the Great War with a critical detachment that those living in the United Kingdom, still grappling with the immediate sectarian violence of the Troubles, might not have even possessed. His first major success, and the band played Waltzing Matilda, which was in 1971. This tackled the Anzac myth with realism.
And the band played Waltzing Matilda.
And the green fields of France would apply that same forensic sorrow to the Western Front. The specific origin of the song can be traced to a holiday Bogle took with his wife in 1976. They travelled from their home in Australia back to Europe, deciding to visit the military cemeteries of Flanders in northern France. This wasn't just a casual sightseeing trip. Bogle had described it as a confrontation with the scale of the loss. They both visited 3 or 4 cemeteries in the Somme region. In interviews, he recounts the sensory experiences of these spaces, the manicured perfection of the Commonwealth War graves, the countless white crosses, and the deafening silence of the countryside. While there, he then began reading the inscriptions on the headstones, and something struck him: the repetitive tragedy of the ages. 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. When thinking about this, he said, "I felt like an ancient grandfather walking amongst some of the gravestones." In contemporary photographs of World War I, they're all unshaven and dirty and unkempt, and they all look like old men, but the average age of the combatant was about 19. Keeping this tragedy in his mind, he retreated to his hometown in Scotland immediately after the trip and wrote the song that we hear today.
And did you leave a wife or a sweetheart behind? In some faithful heart is your memory enshrined.
So who is or who was Willie McBride then? Was he a real person or was he made up? It is actually a little bit of both, and it's quite interesting. Bogle mentioned that he didn't have a particular person in mind when writing the song. It wasn't from a particular gravesite that resonated with him, for example. The name was a choice of convenience for rhyming, essentially. McBride works well with graveside, fireside, and of course bride. But also in 1976, the UK was in the throes of the IRA bombing campaigns. There was a ton of anti-Irish xenophobia across Britain as a result. Eric himself was sympathetic to the Irish experience through his Scottish heritage, and he deliberately wanted an Irish name to challenge the British listener. After all, 200,000 Irish men helped fight for the British Empire in World War I. He was subtly forcing the audience to acknowledge that both countries shared the same sacrifice, something that was, at the time, politically inconvenient for both British nationalists and Irish Republicans. Although Willie McBride was made up according to Bogle, Pete Keelenz, who was the coordinator of the Flanders Fields Museum in Ypres in Belgium, had once checked all 1.7 million names that were registered, and in searching all of these names, there were no fewer than 10 William McBrides. 3 of them died in 1916, 2 of which were members of an Irish regiment, the Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers, and had actually died in the same spot during the Battle of the Somme. One was 21 and the other was 19, matching the Willie McBride in the song. He is buried in the Auteuil Military Cemetery at Grave A36, near the back of the cemetery.
2, 3, 4. There he is. There's a Willie McBride. 21406, Private W. McBride, Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers, 10th of February 1916.
Though Eric Bogle did admit that he did not deliberately pick the name from a grave that he saw, it's either just a pure coincidence or maybe he internalized the name unintentionally while walking through the cemetery. But either way, it's still really interesting to think about this. The 200,000 Irishmen who fought in World War I have been described by historians as a double minority. But what does this mean? In the British Army after the 1916 Easter Rising, while abroad at war, their combat performance was exemplary. High command, though, often fretted about their discipline and loyalty. In Ireland, they were essentially men out of time. When they marched to war in 1914, they believed that they were cementing home rule for Ireland. But by the time that they returned in 1918, the political landscape had shifted to radical republicanism. They were viewed by some as dupes of the British Empire. The song asks a question: did you really believe them when they told you the cause? This resonates differently in Ireland than it does in England. In England, the cause was the defence of liberty, but in Ireland, the cause was home rule, which was lost before the war even ended. Many Irish veterans, just to survive as well in this new landscape, would burn their uniform, get rid of their medals and their papers and all of that stuff. Veterans were often excluded from employment and social life. They were essentially strangers in their own land, despite potentially leaving to go off and fight in the war for the betterment of their own country. And this is a really harsh image, in my opinion. So in a way, we know of no man's land as the space between the sides on the 2 fronts of the war, essentially. After the trenches, where you'll more than likely be shot down in a minute. But in a way, this new Ireland was no man's land for these veterans coming home as well. It was really only in the 1990s, with the peace process, that the Irish state began to officially embrace these men. The Furies' popularity with this song in the 1980s as well was a precursor to this, a way to mourn the men without endorsing the uniform. While Eric Bogle wrote the song, the Furies made it famous. Their 1979 recording, which featured uilleann pipes and Finbar's emotive vocals, it spent 28 weeks in the Irish charts.
Dear mind divine, sit here down by your graveside and rest.
1979 was a violent year in Northern Ireland. Warren Point ambush, the Mountbatten assassination. Throughout this time, the song resonated because it spoke to the waste of life, the waste of young life. A more recent bit of irony revolves around Tony Blair here as well. Former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. He had named the green fields of France as his favourite poem, calling it a pro-peace statement. Though maybe it was his favourite poem. I mean, it is really well written, you have to admit. The imagery is strong and it serves a great purpose. Eric Bogle criticised this endorsement, noting that the irony of a leader who took the United Kingdom into the Iraq War. So in essence, somebody really likes a poem because it's a pro-peace statement, yet has made some conscious decisions behind joining a war. I know I'm trying to simplify it a little bit for a bit of humour, but you just have to admit it's a little bit funny. But another bit of controversy worth mentioning here as well was about Joss Stone, who released a cover which completely cut out the final verse, the political verse. Apparently after this, Bogle and the further folk community were outraged. This was in 2014, so if you're familiar with that, what were your thoughts on it? Let me know in the comments. I know in my other video about She Moved Through the Fair, for example, some of the verses are changed here and there for various reasons, which you can find out in the video. But that song isn't as closely linked with actual historical events as this song is. So choosing to leave out a very important part of the song like that, I'm going to over-exaggerate it a little bit, but it's kind of like choosing to say that the Irish never fought in World War I. Here's the simple truth. There was a Willie McBride. He was around 19 or 20 years old. He died on a quiet Saturday in April 1916 and was buried in a blanket in the chalk of Oatwheel. But here's the complicated truth. His death sits at the precise intersection of two great traumas of 20th century Irish history, the Somme and the Rising. He represents the lost generation, not just in the sense of life lost, but of memory lost. For decades, men like him were written out of the Irish narrative. Eric Bogle's song, through a combination of inspiration, subconscious influence, and poetic genius, retrieved Willie McBride from the silence. But what do you think? The history is complex. Irishmen fighting for Ireland and Britain in World War I, and the people fighting for Ireland at home around 1916. Question marks around whether so many should have even went to fight in World War I in the first place. Was it even the right fight? At the end of the day, I believe that each individual made their choices based on their best belief for what was right at the time. Personally, I didn't spend my whole life discovering Irish history through songs, but from my relatively short experience of Irish history and folk music, compared to the vast majority of all of you watching this, you have to admit it's hard not to have a huge respect for the music and history, don't you think? World War I was brutal. It was a brutal war. So much loss of life, but it happened, and we can remember those who sacrificed their lives throughout those years, whether in mainland Europe or in Dublin, through listening to amazing songs like this one, The Green Fields of France. We've passed a fairly significant date. The 13th of December marked exactly 70 years since the death of Grace Gifford. And even if you don't know the ins or the outs of her life, you definitely know the song. It's absolutely heartbreaking, isn't it? It paints this tragic, romantic picture of a wedding in Kilmainham jail hours before Joseph Plunkett is executed. But what if I told you that the real story is actually way darker than the song implies? Like, we often romanticize 1916. We turn it into statues and ballads. But when you dig into the actual historical records, the witness statements, the prison logs, the wedding wasn't really a wedding in the way that we think about it. It was a grim, hurried, administrative procedure carried out in the dark, and the tragedy didn't end when the shots were fired the next morning.
Joseph Plunkett.
For Grace Gifford, that was just the start of it. So in this video, we're going to look at the reality behind the romance. We'll look at the details of the prison marriage, the secret tragedy that followed it that nobody really talks about. So before we get into the video, please hit that like button and subscribe as well so you don't miss any more videos. But without further ado, let's just get into the video. To understand why this wedding was so desperate, you have to look at Joseph Plunkett himself. In the song, he sounds like this strong, stoic hero, and he was a strategist. He was the director of military operations, but in reality, the man was dying on his feet long before he ever stepped into the GPO, the General Post Office. He had glandular tuberculosis. He spent years trying to recover in places like Italy and Egypt. By the time Easter week rolled around, he had just had surgery on his neck glands. He was literally commanding troops from a mattress in the GPO because he was just too weak to stand. So when we talk about this wedding, it wasn't just two young lovers caught in a war. It was a man who knew he was dying, either by something like the firing squad or tuberculosis itself, trying desperately to secure a future for Grace. And Grace, she came from a totally different world. She was raised from Rathmines, raised Protestant, studied art at the Slade in London. Her mother hated Joseph. She thought he was a disaster, sickly, Catholic and a revolutionary. All of this meant that Grace was as well thrown out of her home eventually. But Grace had already rebelled. She was drawing cartoons for Sinn Féin newspapers, getting deep into the culture. She converted to Catholicism to marry him, but the wedding that they had planned for Easter Sunday obviously never happened. The Rising kicked off, the GPO burned and Plunkett surrendered. Now this is where the song takes a little bit of poetic license. The lyrics say hold me in your arms, but the reality of May 3rd, 1916 was brutal. We know they didn't get to hold each other. Grace learns that Joseph is going to be shot at dawn. She rushes to a jeweller in Dublin to buy 2 rings. She gets to Kilmainham jail at around 6 p.m, but they don't let her in. She's actually left waiting in the precincts of the jail for over 5 hours until nearly midnight. You have to imagine that wait yourself. Sitting there in the dark, the damp, knowing the clock is ticking down to his execution, while the prison staff are running around processing hundreds of prisoners. When they finally let her into the chapel, it wasn't romantic at all. There was no electricity, just single gas light or a candle. Joseph was brought down the iron stairs in handcuffs. The priest, Father Eugene McCarthy, had the cuffs taken off just for the ceremony. But look who's standing there. It wasn't their family. It was 2 British soldiers with bayonets standing guard as witnesses. They weren't even allowed to speak to each other. No speeches, no I love yous whispered in the corner. They just said the liturgical responses required for the sacrament. And the moment that the priest said man and wife, the handcuffs were straight back on. Plunkett was marched back to his cell and Grace was escorted out. That line in the song, let this moment linger, it didn't obviously happen. The wedding night never happened. All that they would have wanted was for that short moment to last forever, that feeling to last forever. But it was cut short by the click of a handcuff and the slamming of a jail door.
With all my love, I'll place this wedding ring upon your finger. There won't be time to share our love, for we must say goodbye.
She was allowed back in at 2 a.m. for a final visit, but even then, the cell was crowded with soldiers. A guard stood there with a watch, counting down 10 minutes. 10 minutes to say goodbye for a lifetime. It is heavy stuff, right? But here's the part that usually gets left out of the history books. And there's a reason this is left out of history books, really, is because there's so much question marks around this. It is likely that Grace was pregnant. Joseph's sister, Geraldine, later confirmed that Grace suffered a miscarriage in the weeks following the rising while living at the Plunkett estate. So that wedding could have potentially been an attempt to legitimize a child that sadly never came to be. You have his sister stating it in her memoirs, and other family members saying this is just malicious gossip. Some other sources even say that this was the reason why British soldiers allowed the marriage to go ahead in the first place. Some say that Geraldine, his sister, was hostile towards Grace and that there were disputes over Joseph's estate. In 1916 Ireland also, having a kid before marriage would have been a pretty big deal. Either way you look at it, whatever the true story behind it, it's tragic nonetheless. And to make matters worse, Joseph's parents, his own mother and father, refused to honour his will. He had written a letter leaving everything to Grace, but because it wasn't a legal will, they cut her off. So here she is, a widow. She's potentially lost a baby and she's penniless as well. But Grace didn't just fade away. And this is why I do love her story. She didn't just sit around being the tragic widow. During the Civil War in 1923, she took the anti-treaty side. The Free State government arrested her and threw her into, you guessed it, Kilmainham jail. The same building where she married Joseph and where he was executed. She spent 3 months in a cell there, and she even painted on the walls too. You can still see it today if you visit the Kilmainham Madonna. She painted the Virgin and Child on her cell wall. It's this haunting image, maybe reflecting her own loss, or maybe just finding comfort in faith. She survived it all. She worked as a cartoonist, she designed costumes for the Abbey Theatre, and she lived until 1955. She was a fighter. So knowing all that, let's have a little look at the song again. It was written in 1985 by Frank and Sean O'Mara. Sean actually went to the jail to read Plunkett's letters to nail the emotion of the song right. And to be fair to them, they really did nail that feeling, even if it was softened by the reality. When it's sung, we aren't singing about tuberculosis and miscarriage or the soldiers with the stopwatch. We're singing about the idea of it. The idea that love is stronger than the execution squad. The song acts as a vehicle for the memory. And if it wasn't for this ballad, how many of us would know Grace Gifford's name today? If you listen closely to the final verse of She Moved Through the Fair, the warmth of the romance vanishes. The bride returns not as a living woman, but as a silent, gliding figure. She is dead. This song is the definitive Irish ghost story and is classified as a revenant ballad, a narrative where the boundary between the living and the dead crosses, but it might also serve as a hybrid. It was born from the specific collaboration between the poet Patriot Game and the musicologist Herbert Hughes, who fused the oral traditions of County Donegal with the refined aesthetics of the Irish literary revival. Throughout this video, we're going to dissect that collaboration. We will examine the Mixolydian mode that gives the melody its unresolved, haunting tension and unique quality, and we will trace how a rural folk fragment was engineered into a masterpiece. Let's have a look at the history behind this absolutely beautiful and haunting song. We can trace the song's global arrival to 1909. That year, Herbert Hughes included it in his book Irish Country Songs. Before this publication, the tune existed only in the oral traditions of Donegal. Hughes was the one who finally wrote it down and secured its future. Herbert Hughes was a Belfast-born musicologist and critic who played a pivotal role in the preservation of traditional Irish music. Unlike some purist collectors who sought to preserve songs exactly as sung by the peasantry, which were often unaccompanied and rhythmically free, Hughes was interested in arranging these melodies for the piano and the concert platform. Hughes had a specific goal. He took that wild Donegal melody and wrapped it in a classical arrangement. He needed it to fit the drawing rooms of Dublin and London. This distinction is key. The song we know today is not a rough field recording. It is a polished piece of work, carefully designed by a professional composer. And who was Padraig Colum? He was a central figure in the Irish literary revival, working alongside W.B. Yeats and Lady Gregory. But he came from a different world. Born in a Longford workhouse, he had a genuine connection to the rural working class. He was a poet who captured the rhythm of real Irish speech. For this song, he acted as a restorer. He took the scattered verses and shaped them into the story that we know today. The genesis of this song can be traced to a walking tour of County Donegal undertaken by Hughes and Colum in the early years of the 20th century. Donegal, located in the extreme northwest of Ireland, was and remains a region of immense cultural significance. It was a Gaeltacht or an Irish-speaking area, geographically isolated by mountains and bogland, which allowed ancient traditions and songs to survive long after they had vanished from the more anglicised East Coast. During this trip, the two men collected melodies from local singers. The methodology was informal. They would visit cottages, share hospitality, and Hughes would note down melodies on his staff while Colum listened to the words. It was this context that they encountered the air that would become She Moved Through the Fair. The specific source of the melody is often debated, but it is generally accepted to be a variant of a song known locally as Our Wedding Day or I Once Had a True Love. The proof didn't arrive until 1970. Near the end of his life, Padraig Colum wrote a letter to the Irish Times, and he wanted to clarify exactly what he wrote and what he didn't. He admitted that the song they originally heard in Donegal was mostly clumsy and disjointed, but there was one exception. The final verse, the vision of the dead lover entering the room, was the only part he kept exactly as he found it. Think about what that means. The walk through the fair, Colum likely wrote that. The love story was the modern edition. The only piece of song that is truly ancient is the ghost. Colum didn't invent the haunting, he just built a narrative structure to house it. The opening verse grounds us in reality. These are young lovers dealing with the harsh economics of rural Ireland. There is a specific word here that unlocks the whole story. The kind. When she says, "My parents will not slight you for your lack of kind."
And my father was like you, for your lack of kind.
Most people assume she means kindness or type. She doesn't really in this situation. It is actually a corruption of an old word, kine, K-I-N-E. This is an archaic word for cattle. In the Ireland of the past, cows were currency. If you didn't have cattle, you didn't have a dowry. You were broke. So she's telling him that her father won't reject him just because he's poor. She is removing the financial barrier to their marriage. This makes the tragedy much worse. They successfully overcame the obstacles of the living world, money, class, and parental approval. They fixed everything, but just as they cleared the path to the altar, a much darker obstacle was waiting for them.
She stepped away from me, and she moved through the fair. And so fondly I watched her go here and go there.
This verse paints a vivid picture. The fair represents the chaos of society. It is a place full of noise, commerce, and life. Notice the contrast in the lyrics. The narrator is frozen, he's just watching. She's the one active, moving away from him and dissolving into the crowd. This is the moment of separation. In the logic of a ghost story, this is the last time he ever sees her as a living, breathing woman. By moving through the fair, she's passing through the world of the living, destined for somewhere else.
And she went away homeward with one star away, as the swan in the evening moves over the lake.
The imagery gets heavy here. She's compared to a swan moving over a lake. In Irish myth, swans aren't just pretty birds. Think of the children of Lear. Swans are often shapeshifters or messengers from the other world. By comparing her to a swan, the song is distancing her from humanity. She is becoming something ethereal. Then we have the one star awake, and this sets the scene at dusk. In folklore, twilight is a thin place, a gateway between night and day, or the living and the dead. She is going homeward, but as we are about to see, home isn't a house, it is the grave. The missing verse now, most modern versions skip this next part.
The people were saying no to railway, but one has a sorrow that never was shared.
This is the missing link. It confirms here that the wedding never happened. It speaks of a sorrow too painful to mention. Including this verse removes all the ambiguity. It tells us that the woman visiting him in the final verse isn't a dream. She is a ghost. And now we reach the climax. The timeline jumps to last night. We are no longer at the busy fair. We are in his bedroom. This is where the lyrics matter the most. Some singers soften the blow and sing, "My young love came in," but the true version, sung by the likes of McCormick, doesn't hide anything. "My dead love came in." There is no ambiguity there.
Last night I did dream it, my young love came in.
The song says her feet made no din. Din here is just an old word for noise. Ghosts are weightless, they don't disturb the floorboards. The silence of her entry here is the complete opposite of the noise of the fair from earlier on. Then she touches him and delivers the final line. "It will not be long, love, till our wedding day." This is the twist in my opinion. Since she is dead, she can't come back to life to marry him. A marriage between the living and the dead is impossible, as you know. You can guess what I'm going to say next. So she isn't promising to return, she is predicting his death. In folklore, she's acting as a fetch. A spirit sent to collect a dying soul. She's telling him to get ready. The wedding day she's talking about is probably the day of his funeral. They will be reunited, but only in the grave. Now we need to talk about why this song actually sounds haunted. The haunting feeling is engineered directly into the music itself, using something called the Mixolydian mode. There's more than just your standard keys in music. Very simply, imagine the scale of C. It goes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. No sharps, no flats. In C Mixolydian, you just flatten the 7th note. So that B becomes a B flat. That's it really. It's one small change, but it makes a massive difference. In a normal scale, that B note desperately wants to go up to C, but the B flat, it doesn't. It just floats there. It leaves you hanging. This musical trick mirrors the story perfectly. The lover is caught between life and death. The narrator is caught between waiting and grief. The music refuses to give you the satisfaction of a happy ending, just as the ghost refuses to leave the narrator's mind. This scale was practically built for Irish instruments like the uilleann pipes or the fiddle. Why? Because of the drone. The drone is that low, constant note that plays underneath the melody and never really stops. When you play that flattened 7th note we just talked about against the steady low drone, it creates friction, it rubs against the harmony. That clash is what gives ancient Celtic music that hypnotic, trance-like feeling. This sound is so distinct that it actually travelled halfway around the world. In the 1960s, the legendary guitarist Davy Graham noticed something strange. He realised that this "She Moved Through the Fair" melody sounded almost exactly like Indian classical music, specifically a raga. He started playing the song with those Eastern influences. It proved that this Celtic drone wasn't just Irish, it was ancient. It tapped into a mystical sound that connects cultures that are thousands of miles apart. This song didn't just appear out of thin air. It grew out of the specific hard soil of County Donegal. If you have ever been to or live in Donegal, you know it is a place apart. It's rugged, it's wild, and for a long time it was completely cut off from the British laws being made down in Dublin. Because of that isolation, the old ways held on much longer here. Beliefs in fairies, curses and ghosts weren't just bedtime stories for children. They were a genuine part of daily life, but the people didn't just stay put. There was a massive tradition of seasonal migration. Men and women would travel from Donegal across to Scotland for the potato harvest. They took that boat across the North Channel and they took their songs with them. That is why you find versions of this melody in Scotland too. And vice versa, a lot of songs from Scotland are found in Donegal. It belongs to a shared sea kingdom that connected the two coasts. When the lyrics mention the fair, don't picture a modern fun fair. Think of a hiring fair. In rural Ireland, these were critical. It was where you sold your cattle, or worse, where you sold your own labour. These events were loud, chaotic and packed with people. For a young couple, it was one of the few places they could actually be seen together in public. The song uses this setting for a specific reason. The fair represents the absolute peak of life and noise. By having the woman move through the crowds and then disappear homeward, the song creates a brutal contrast. She leaves the noisiest place on earth and enters the silence of the grave. She was vibrant and visible one moment and gone the next. This song isn't a one-off. It belongs to a very specific dark family of folklore known as revenant songs. The rules of the genre were terrifyingly simple. If you grieved too much, your tears would disturb the dead and wake them up. Or if you made a promise, like a marriage vow, death didn't let you out of the contract. You still had to honour it. In most of these songs, the ghost is physically dangerous. There is a famous line in The Unquiet Grave: "One kiss of your clay-cold lips, and my time will not be long." In She Moved Through the Fair, the encounter feels softer. She doesn't attack him. She just lays a hand on him. But don't let the romance fool you. It is still a summons. Colm might have polished the rough edges, but the core message is the same. The dead have come to collect a debt. The reason this specific ghost interpretation survived isn't just down to folklore. It is down to the singers who decided which version of the truth to tell. Over the last century, 5 key recordings locked this supernatural narrative into history. It started in 1941 with John McCormick. McCormick was a global superstar of the gramophone era. When he recorded this, he sang with the crystal clear enunciation of a classically trained tenor. Most importantly, he made a choice. He didn't sing Young Love, he sang My Dead Love. Because of his fame, this became the gold standard. He codified the lyrics for future generations, ensuring the ghost story didn't fade away. Then, in the 1950s, the song went back to the streets with Margaret Barry. Barry was a legendary traveller and street singer with a voice that could cut glass. The irony here is beautiful. She actually learned the song from a John McCormick record. It proves the cycle of Irish music. A street song became high art, and then Margaret Barry took it back to the pavement. She played it on the banjo with a raw, harsh power that stripped away McCormick's polish. But she kept that crucial dead love lyric. By the 1960s, Anne Briggs stripped it back even further. A key figure in the British folk revival, Briggs performed it a cappella. No piano, no banjo, just her voice. Her version feels like a private hallucination, without any instrumentation to hide behind that Mixolydian melody. Feels stark and exposed. It influenced an entire generation of folk rockers, including Led Zeppelin. planting the seed that this wasn't just a folk song, but something mystical. In 1988, Van Morrison and the Chieftains took that mysticism and slowed it to a crawl. On the album Irish Heartbeat, they wrapped the song in a thick mist-like atmosphere of uilleann pipes and fiddles. Morrison repeats phrases over and over, entering a trance-like state. He delivers the Dead Love line not with fear, but with a heavy spiritual resignation. And finally we arrive at the version that defines the song for the modern generation. Sinead O'Connor in 1996. Recorded for the Michael Collins soundtrack, this version feels like a requiem. Sinead flips the gender, singing He Moved Through the Fair, creating a female perspective on grief. Her voice is breathy and fragile. She sounds like a ghost herself. By pairing this song with the assassination of Collins, she cemented it as the soundtrack of national trauma. It became a song about martyrdom, civil war, and the tragedy of young lives cut short. When you stack up the evidence, the verdict is clear. She Moved Through the Fair is a masterpiece of constructed folklore. Padraig Colum took a fragmented, clumsy ghost story from the wilds of Donegal and polished it into a universal ballad. The ghost is the structural foundation of the entire song. We see it in the lyrics. Every line leads inevitably to that final, brutal revelation of the dead love. The missing verse about the sorrow that never was said is the smoking gun. We hear it in the music. That Mixolydian mode creates a perpetual state of suspension. It refuses to resolve. It mirrors the limbo of the spirit perfectly. And finally, we have the confession from Colum later himself. He confirmed that the vision of the dead lover was the seed that started it all. He built a narrative structure specifically for the ghost to live in. It captures the universal experience of grief. It validates the feeling that the people we lose are merely moving through a different space, out of sight, waiting for the rest of us to catch up.
This young man was hanged in a village called Tombridge in County Antrim for his part in an uprising in 1798. His name was Roddy McCorley.
In February 1800, a young man was brought to the Bridge of Toom in County Antrim. His name was Roddy McCorley. He was sentenced to death by hanging, but the punishment didn't stop when he was dead. The British authorities wanted to send a message. They denied him a coffin. They denied him a spot in the churchyard. Instead, they dug a hole in the middle of the road, right beneath the shadows of the gallows, and they buried him there. For the next 50 years, the world moved on. Carts rolled over the earth. Horses trampled the ground. Thousands of travellers walked across the bridge, never realising they were stepping on the body of a man who had fought for Ireland. He was put there so he would be forgotten. But in 1852, workmen arrived to repair the foundations of the bridge. As they dug through the hard-packed earth of the road, their shovels hit something. They cleared away the dirt and found a skeleton. A local man, a relative of the McCorley family, was called to the scene. He confirmed what the older locals had whispered for decades. This was Roddy McCorley. His bones were finally moved to a quiet churchyard in Dunedin, giving him the peace he was denied for half a century. But the fact remains, for 50 years, the hero of one of our most famous songs was lying in the dirt beneath a busy road. To understand why he was put there and why he was so hated by the authorities, we have to look at the life he actually led. A soldier or an outlaw? Let's find out. The figure of Roddy McCorley stands at the crossroads of Irish history and Irish folklore. To the casual listener, he is the subject of a rousing ballad, a marching song that tells the tragic story of a young man dying for his country.
Oh, see the fleet-foot hosts of men who speed with faces wan.
To the historian, he is a more complex, shadowy figure, a rank-and-file rebel turned outlaw whose actual life has been obscured by the very song that made him famous. To understand why a young miller's son would end up on the gallows, we must first understand the world that created him. Roddy McCorley didn't act in a vacuum. He was a product of the year 1798, a year that remains a scar on the Irish psyche. In the late 1700s, Ireland was a kingdom in name only. It was controlled by the British Crown through a parliament in Dublin that represented only a small fraction of the population. The penal laws as well, though relaxing slightly, still discriminated heavily against Catholics and Presbyterians. The Society of United Irishmen was born in Belfast in 1791. Its founders were mostly Presbyterians, dissenters who were locked out of power just like their Catholic neighbours. Their vision was radical at the time. They wanted to break the connection with England. They wanted an independent republic. Most importantly, they wanted to unite Protestant, Catholic and dissenter under the common name of Irishmen. County Antrim, where Roddy lived, was the heartland of this movement. It was a place of radical ideas. The American Revolution had inspired the Presbyterians of the North. They saw the British Crown as a tyrant. When the French Revolution erupted in 1789, it poured fuel on the fire. The United Irishmen began to organise a military structure. They appointed officers, they gathered weapons, they prepared for war. Roddy McCorley was born in the parish of Dunedin, near Tunbridge. Sorry to interrupt the video, it's editor Ronan here. I just want to show you a mistake that I made, just to show how sometimes it can be hard to find verified information online and mistakes can easily be made. But in trying to find, maybe a painting or something of Roddy McCorley, this image kept coming up. I even downloaded it as roddymccorley.jpg, and it's on several websites, but that's actually Henry Joy McCracken. I wasn't familiar with Henry Joy or the Roddy McCorley story really before researching all of this. I nearly put his picture up as Roddy McCorley, and sure, that would have been wrong, wouldn't it? So there's lots of websites out there that actually show this is Roddy McCorley, but it's actually Henry Joy McCracken, as you probably saw from earlier on the video, just about here. I just dragged that down a little bit there so you can see it's Wolf Tone and Henry Joy McCracken. It's the same person. He's got a different haircut. His sideburns are a little bit longer. Yeah, every time you search Roddy McCorley or Henry Joy McCracken, it comes up with the same picture. So there isn't really a picture of him, understandably enough, as you'll learn a little bit more later in the video as to why that is. But anyway, sorry for interrupting the video. Let's get right back into it. He was the son of a miller, and this is a significant detail. Millers were tradesmen. They were not the poorest of the peasantry. They had a standing in the community. However, the McCorley family suffered a devastating blow before the rebellion even began. Roddy's father was executed for stealing sheep. Around this time, theft of livestock was a capital offence. But in the charged political atmosphere of Antrim, the family believed this was not simple justice. They believed it was a political hit. They claimed that the father was targeted because he was a troublemaker or an agitator, and the sheep-stealing charge was cursed perjury used to silence him. Following the execution, the family was evicted from their home. This is the crucial psychological context for Roddy McCorley. When he took up the pike in 1798, he was not just fighting for an abstract republic. He was fighting a government that had hanged his father and thrown his mother onto the roadside. His motivation was personal. There is a persistent debate about Roddy's religion. The song treats him as a generic Irish martyr, which in the 20th century usually implies Catholicism. Some historical sources suggest he might have been Presbyterian. The United Irishmen in Antrim were overwhelmingly Presbyterian. It is more likely that Roddy was a Catholic who was part of the Defenders. The Defenders were a Catholic agrarian secret society that allied with the United Irishmen. He was eventually buried in the graveyard of the Dunedin Church of Ireland. But this doesn't prove that he was Protestant either, as this was the only consecrated ground available for local burials. However, the ambiguity of all of this adds to his mystique. The rebellion in County Antrim was short, bloody and chaotic. Understanding the specific events of June 1798 helps us confirm or debunk the claims made in the song. The rebellion began in the south of Ireland in May 1798. The north was slower to rise. The leadership in Belfast hesitated, but finally, Henry Joy McCracken, a charismatic leader from a wealthy Belfast family, took command. He issued the order for the men of Antrim to rise on June 7th, 1798. Roddy McCorley would have been one of those thousands who answered the call. The song claims he led a stalwart band, leading his local Dunedin neighbours.
Behind him marched in grim array a stalwart earnest band.
The rebels converged on Antrim town. Their weapon of choice was the pike. The rebels tried to storm the town. They fought with incredible bravery. They charged the British artillery, trying to capture the guns. The arrival of British reinforcements and the terrifying power of grape shot, these were canister rounds fired from cannons, it broke the rebel lines. The rebel army disintegrated. While the main battle raged in Antrim, other skirmishes occurred. Local folklore often places Roddy at the fight in Randallstown or at the attack on the bridge at Tuam. The Duneen men were ordered to destroy the bridge at Tuam to stop British reinforcements crossing the River Bann. It's highly probable that Roddy was involved in this specific action. This connects him directly to the bridge where he would later die. The song says that he goes to die on the bridge, and history suggests that he fought to destroy that very bridge 2 years earlier. The song jumps from the rebellion directly to the execution. It skips the 2 years in between, and history tells us that Roddy didn't die in 1798. He survived and became an outlaw. After the defeat at Antrim, the government offered an amnesty. If a rebel surrendered his pike and swore an oath of allegiance, he could go home. Most men did take this deal. They had families to feed, but some men were excluded from the amnesty. People like leaders or high-ranking officers, deserters, these are men who may have served in British militia and switched sides, and murderers as well, men accused of specific killings during the risings. Thomas Archer was a former militiaman who had deserted to the rebels. He couldn't surrender. He would be shot for treason, so he took to the woods. He gathered a group of hardcore rebels around him. These were men who had absolutely nothing to lose. Roddy McCorley joined this gang. This transforms Roddy's story. He was not just a patriot martyr, he was a rapparee, a guerrilla fighter living off the land. The Archer gang operated in the bogs and forests of South Antrim. They were a terrifying force. They attacked the homes of loyalists and yeomanry officers. They stole money, arms, and food. The authorities viewed them as common bandits. Was their motivation crime or politics? It was likely both. They needed to steal to survive. But they chose targets who were enemies of the rebellion. To the British, they were nefarious wretches. To the local peasantries, they were heroes continuing the fight. For nearly 2 years, late 1798 to the early 800, Roddy lived on the run. They hid in the Duneen bogs along the banks of the River Bann. And this is difficult terrain. It's wet, it's marshy, hard for regular soldiers to traverse. They relied on the locals for food and shelter. Without the silence of the community, they would have been caught in a week. The end of the Archer gang came not through military defeat, but through betrayal. The British authorities, they knew that they couldn't hunt down Archer and McCorley in the bogs, so they used money. They offered huge rewards for information. In a starving, war-torn country, money was a powerful weapon. Local folklore is very specific about who betrayed Roddy. The names are Duffin and Mackerlane. Duffin is often described as a neighbour or a friend or even a fellow rebel who turned coat. The song implies a Judas-like treachery, but the reality was likely a mix of greed and exhaustion. By 1800, the community was just exhausted, tired. The gang's presence brought soldiers and searches. The community support mentioned earlier was just fading. Duffin may have betrayed Roddy to restore peace to the parish, or simply for the British gold. Roddy was hiding in a specific location when he was taken. Several sources mention he was hiding in a cot on the banks of the River Bann. A cot in this case is a small, flat-bottomed boat used for fishing or transport. It would have been pulled into the reeds or turned over to provide a makeshift shelter. Duffin led the soldiers to the spot, and Roddy was taken by surprise. There is no record of a shootout. He was likely asleep or just overpowered before he could reach any of his weapons. This quiet capture contrasts with the violent life that he had led. The execution of Roddy McCorley is the climax of the story. It is the moment where the man becomes the myth. We must separate the factual timeline from the poetic one. Roddy was taken to Ballymena, a major market town. He was not tried by a jury of his peers. He was tried by a court-martial. He was charged with rebellion and with the robberies committed by the Archer gang and found guilty, where he was then sentenced to death by hanging. on Friday, the 28th of February 1800. The Belfast Newsletter, which was a pro-government newspaper, reported the trial. It listed Roddy alongside other gang members, names like Stuart, Dunn and Ryan. It described them as nefarious wretches who have kept this neighbourhood in the greatest misery. This proves that, to the authorities, he was a criminal and not a soldier. One of the most persistent beliefs is that Roddy was executed on Good Friday. A tombstone erected years later famously bore the inscription, "Died on Good Friday 1799, but contemporary records, the Belfast Newsletter, confirm that he was executed on February 28, 1800. February 28 was indeed a Friday, however, Good Friday in 1800 fell in April. The year on the tombstone 1799 was also wrong. Why the differences though? The Good Friday connection is a powerful narrative device. You could even argue that it links Roddy McCorley with Jesus Christ. It frames his execution as a holy sacrifice for the redemption of Ireland. The myth overwrote the facts because it felt more true to the people's emotions. The court ordered that Roddy be executed at Toombridge, not Ballymena. Toom was his home. It was the centre of his crimes. Hanging him there was a specific message of terror to his family and neighbours. He was marched under heavy guard from Ballymena to Toom, in and around 10 to 12 miles. This is the narrow street that he steps up in the song.
Up the narrow street he stepped, smiling, proud and young.
The song says that he was smiling, proud and young, and even the hostile newspaper reports admitted that the executed men often died with fortitude. In the culture of 1798, dying game, or dying bravely, was the final act of defiance a rebel could perform. The gallows were erected at the end of the bridge over the River Bann. He was hanged by the neck until dead. The British authorities denied him a proper burial. He was buried under the gallows, literally in the roadway. This was the ultimate insult. Travellers would walk and carts would roll over his body. It was an attempt to erase his memory and prevent his grave from becoming a shrine. However, the British attempts to erase him failed. In 1852, workmen were digging up the road to rebuild the bridge, and they found a skeleton. A relative was either among the workmen or was called to the scene. He identified the location as Roddy's burial place. The bones were collected and moved to the Duneen Church of Ireland graveyard. He was finally given a dignified burial over 50 years after his death. If Roddy McCorley had just been another hanged rebel, we would not be discussing him today in this video. He would just be a footnote in the local history book. The song is the reason that his name is so well known today. The lyrics of Roddy McCorley were not written in 1798. They were written 100 years later by Anna Johnston, who wrote under the pen name Ethna Carberry in and around 1900 to 1902. At the turn of the 20th century, there was this massive cultural movement in Ireland to revive the language, the sports and history. This was known as the Gaelic Revival. The centenary of the 1798 rebellion in 1898 was a huge event. Carberry was a national poet. She wanted to create heroes for a new generation. She took the local folklore of Duneen and polished it into high art. She stripped away the messy reality of the Archer gang and the robberies. She left only the pure golden-haired martyr. The music is a crucial part of the legend. It's played as a march. The tune itself is an old traditional air. What stands out most to me, the lyrics are tragic. A man is dying, but the music is triumphant.
And young Roddy McCorley goes to die on the bridge of Toom today.
This contrast creates a specific emotional effect. It makes the listener feel defiant rather than defeated. Interestingly as well, the melody of Roddy McCorley has a second life. In 1957, the IRA launched a border campaign. 2 volunteers, Sean South and Fergal O'Hanlon, were killed in an attack on a police barracks in Brookborough. Sean South's supporters wanted a song to commemorate him. They took the melody of Roddy McCorley and wrote new lyrics. This recycled the 1798 magic for the 1950s generation. For many people, the tune represents the continuity of the physical force tradition in Irish republicanism, from the pike of 1798 to the gun of 1957. The historical Roddy was a victim of his time. He was a young man whose family was destroyed by the state. He fought back the only way that he knew how, first with a pike in an army, and then with a gun in a gang. He was hunted, betrayed by his neighbours, and buried like a wild animal under a road. The mythical Roddy is the creation of the people who survived. They took his broken body and turned it into a symbol. They invented the Good Friday date to make him holy. They wrote a marching song to make him strong. The song proves that while the British can kill the man, they couldn't kill the story. In the end, Roddy McCorley is both the nefarious wretch of the 1800 newspaper and the hero of the North of the 1902 ballad. So thanks for watching. If you've made it this far, please hit that like button before you go, and subscribe as well if you don't want to miss any future videos. Also, let me know what you thought about this down in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts. And if you're interested in getting yourself some Irish music themed bits and pieces, please check out the shop. You can kill two birds with one stone effectively. You can show your love for Irish music and support the channel at the same time. It really helps me out, and I can continue making videos like this. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to our channel members. Here's your names up on screen. Thanks again as always for your continued support. And I'd also like to give a warm welcome to Liz Kerry 8550. Thanks a million for joining. I'm so happy to have you along for the journey. If you'd like to join them, just hit that join button down below or check out the links in the description for more information. It's just another way that you can support the channel to keep these videos coming. As well as that, there is a hype feature down near the comments. If you could hype the video, I don't even know what it does, but maybe it'll help. I'd really appreciate it. The famine years came in the decades following the Roddy McCorley story. So if you'd like to get an idea of what Ireland sounded like around this time and how the famine affected music, check out this video here. It gives a unique look on the country at the time. As we know the name of the famine as the Great Hunger, the Famine, the Potato Famine, whatever have you, these years created something called the Great Silence. So check it out if you've got time, and I'm fairly sure you'll enjoy it. It's likely you've heard the Rakes of Mallow before. It's a very popular Irish song and polka, with a great story behind it. In this video, we're going to take a step back in time to Mallow, County Cork in the 1700s. And we're going to try and put ourselves in the shoes of one of those rakes. What is a rake? That's just one of the questions we're going to be answering today with the help of a great man called Hank Weedell, who had also written his own version of the song, which is an awesome blend of the melody itself with some rock and roll as well. If a TV show was going to be made about the life of some of these people that we're going to be talking about, I personally think that this song would be a perfect fit as a theme song for it. Because hearing what they got up to as well, I would definitely watch it too. The song itself is about the Cray family, who came from Doneraile just 11 kilometers away. That's about as long as 11,500 five-string banjos for our viewers who don't use the metric system. It was published around 1742 in London and later in Scotland during the 1980s. It's even made its way as far east as India by the Carnatic music composer Muthuswami Dikshitar in the 18th or 19th century with Sanskrit lyrics as a prayer to the goddess Meenakshi. I have a link down in the description as well, so you can have a listen to that if you want. I had absolutely no idea of this too. I personally found that very interesting. Hank himself, though, has a much better take on the whole thing. So before we get talking to him, please do me a huge favour and just check and see if you're subscribed, just so you don't miss any new videos. Please give this video a like as well, and feel free to comment below as you're watching the video. Continuing on with featuring some community creations, we've got this one here which Hank sent on to me, which was painted onto a barron by Sheena Crowley from Cork, who's the daughter of the late Mick Crowley, who ran the famous Crowley's music shop in Cork City. The name of the illustration is Scrimplini, the supernatural lights that dance before our eyes. Sheena herself now runs Crowley's music shop. This as well is where Rory Gallagher bought his famous Stratocaster in the early 1960s. So if you're in and around the Cork City area, please do drop by. I have a link in the description for the shop as well. And as well as that, the best comment on the last video has to go to, honestly, one of the best people for commenting on Bradon Fasa. In the past as well, there has been some legendary comments there. But this one basically summing it up perfectly about the Wild Rover not being 100% an Irish-bred song. At the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. It's all the song of the people, and throw in a few drinks in there with a sing-song, and everyone will be having a blast, no matter where you're from. And thanks again to everyone commenting on the videos. I really do love hearing from you all. With Christmas just around the corner as well, I want to have a little bit of fun with this video, okay? So if you are subscribed to the channel and comment down below, tell me where you first heard the song The Rakes of Mallow. What I'm going to do is I'm going to choose one subscriber comment at random to get a free item from the Inside Irish Music Shop. So check out the shop as well to familiarise yourself with the stuff there. I will announce the winner around Christmas time thereabouts, either in a video or on a channel post, but probably both. Rest assured though, I will announce it, so please keep your eyes peeled. And more importantly, keep those comments coming. And also feel free to send in any of your creations to me, and we'll chat about it in the video like this. But anyway, without further ado, let's have a chat with Hank about the Rakes of Mallow. So Hank, what drew you to the song the Rakes of Mallow in the first place?
My late mother was born in Mallow to parents from West Kerry, from the Onascall Inch Strand area. And in the 1930s, when my mother was born, her parents had moved to Mallow because a sugar factory had opened up there in 1934, I think. And my mother came along in 1938. They, unlike a lot of other people in Ireland at the time, instead of going to the UK or the United States, my grandparents went to Mallow because there was an employment opportunity there. And they raised their family in Mallow. My mother, though, in 1958, went to New York City, where she met my father, my late father. Mallow was always, like I said to you before, in previous conversations, Mallow was like this mythical place when I was growing up in the States. But I was born in 1963. I was brought back to Ireland in 66 for a holiday, and in 71 with my mother. My father came in 71, and in 71 they decided that they would try and one day move back. And in 74, my mother had had enough of New York City and decided we were all going to move back to Mallow. So I was 11 years old and we moved to Mallow. While I was growing up in the United States, my mother would lilt the tune like so many Irish mammies would lilt the tune. La 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 la. And it just got imprinted in my young brain as a thing. And then as I became more and more aware of the music of Ireland and just multimedia in general, I realized that the tune was quite ubiquitous. It was everywhere, mainly as a dance tune. And the thing about it was in the quiet, man. Symphony orchestras have done it, and every Ceilidh band that you might have heard would have played the tune along the way. And then I found out there were words, but the words were like a geography lesson of North Cork. It went Mallow, Tallow, Kappa, Quinn, Donna, Rail, and Charleville, breaking windows upside down, hooray for the Rakes of Mallow town. But the thing that got me always was breaking windows upside down. I was like, what's that about? And it was explained to me that Mallow was quite a party town in the 1740s, briefly, yeah. That's basically it. And I found out that there were other lyrics that were more specific to the time. And this is over years, decades, really, that this was in my brain. But initially, it was my mother being from Mallow and hearing the tune and becoming aware of its global popularity that drew me to it.
So we have a simple melody, which, look, along with some of the other simple tunes that a lot of people learn when they're young in Ireland, right? You mightn't really think much about it, especially if you're forced to learn tin whistle and all you want to do at the time is play football, right? But even one of the most simple Irish tunes has a cool story hidden behind it. And before talking to Hank, I really wasn't aware of it myself either. Let's paint a picture here, right? It's early 1990s. A kid has been handed a piece of paper with tin whistle notation on it titled The Rakes of Mallow. And you think, why is there a song about a rake? The innocent ignorance can just make you accept that it's just a name, and not to bother asking more questions about it. It is what it is at the end of the day, right? Look, I did know it wasn't about the thing that you clean up leaves in your garden with, right? But the question was just stuck in my head. What was a rake? Or even, who were they? And here's a silly but absolutely, crucial question for those who don't already know. What is a rake? We're not talking about the thing that you might find in your garden, as you know, but what are rakes in the Rakes of Mallow?
To the best of my knowledge, a rake is a person so debauched that they'll be spending all eternity in hell raking coals. So that's one of the explanations that I've gathered about what a rake is, that you'd be so debauched that you'd be condemned to eternity raking coals in hell. And I think that's a description of a person that's sort of carefree, veering between sort of like carefree and careless. It's more affectionate these days. Your man's a bit of a rake, or your one's a bit of a rake. The one thing I find interesting about all this actually is that the original lyrics are by a guy called Ned Lycett, who we should really mention in this whole thing. He wrote both male and female lyrics, and it was an equal opportunity. And even in the song that I've produced, there's an echo of that. Well, there's an actual. We dealt with that. It has to do with the exuberance of youth, but in Mallow in particular, it had to do with something maybe, I don't want to say sinister, but it was hardcore. People would come to Mallow because Mallow was a tourist spot because of the warm water, the bats, and they would raise hell, almost on a nightly basis. This was maybe during the summers and that and all that. But they would cause trouble in the middle of the town, so much so that bay windows were built up the street from where the dust-ups would happen, so that people could sit out and watch the carry-on in the town. And funnily enough, actually, the layout of the town is not much different from what it was maybe in the 1750s, that type of thing. It's all there still. The thing about a rake as well is that it's there's not just the Rakes of Mallow, there's the Rakes of Limerick, there's a Rake's Progress. You'll find it in literature and other pieces of music as well. Describing, I think, having to do with dance, really, the Rakes of Limerick, the Rakes of Mallow, they're both well-known tunes. The song by Ned Lycett, or the lyrics by Ned Lycett, talk about people having a really good time in the exuberance of youth. That's probably the best way to do it and say it. But that's on one side. The other side is people that were kind of like troublemakers too, that they were a trouble to themselves or they were trouble to their families. The other thing, as far as I can make out, is that a rake was usually well got. I don't know, does everyone understand that? But that's a phrase you hear now, they're well got. A rake was often someone of the, shall we say, upper classes, or had means to be like that, who had means to carry on in a certain sort of like reckless way. To be specific about the Rakes of Mallow, apparently the original rakes were from the Cray family from Doneraile, that would come in, wreak havoc in the town with drinking and carrying on, and there'd be a lot of fighting and all that sort of stuff going on. Then, that's where the original rakes were. They would come in from Doneraile. And Doneraile's mentioned in that geographical version of that I mentioned there earlier. Doneraile's about 10 miles outside of Mallow. They'd come in, they were known to wreak havoc. And the song was kind of based on their exploits, from what I can tell. I think, like so many other spa towns in Europe at the time, they were centers for great social activity, shall we say, good and bad. Lots of drinking, and it's in the original lyrics too. Claret drinking was a thing, drinking claret and all that sort of stuff.
So the Rakes of Mallow refers to the Cray family, who came from the nearby town of Doneraile in County Cork. A rake, which is short for rake hell, referred to a person, typically a wealthy man, who was notorious for a lifestyle of drinking, womanizing, reckless spending, and general hell-raising, as Hank mentioned. The lyrics of the song describe such a lifestyle. Bowing, belling, dancing, drinking, breaking windows, cursing, sinking, ever raking, never thinking, live the Rakes of Mallow. In trying to look up the Cray family, they were apparently an established gentry family in County Cork, with a branch that had settled in the Doneraile area, and it seemed that some younger or more boisterous members of the family gained a reputation for acting the gobshite, basically, at the Mallow Spa town, which at the time was a very popular resort in the 18th century. But I wanted to know a little bit more about Mallow around that time. Again, it's fascinating for me that Mallow would have been a popular destination to go to. Today you've got families going to Spain for their yearly holiday, right? Imagine trying something different, alright kids, guess where we're off to this year? Mallow! Is there a beach? Your kid asks you. No, but I bet there's a nice wee puddle for you to play in. Joking aside, Hank helped paint a proper picture of what it was like in Mallow at the time. So Mallow, as an Irish person myself, right, I never would have figured Mallow as a tourist destination at all. I've been in and around the Cork and Kerry area, and that area is just so much to see. You know, it's beautiful. But it seems like, according to the song back in the 1700s, Mallow was the place to be if you want to have a bit of fun. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about, you know, what you learned from other people or from researching the song yourself.
I think the song itself, the original song by Ned Lycett, was a real window into a pre-famine Ireland that at that point, by the 1740s and 1750s, was very much part of the British Empire. The town became famous, like, say, Cheltenham and a couple other places on the continent for having these warm water baths. And it was a place that people came to. People like warm water baths. They're like, you know, so you mightn't think that in pre-famine Ireland, but certainly it was. I read somewhere once that its popularity is what brought it down. It became so popular that it kind of ate itself. It destroyed itself, and it became too unruly and too debauched for people to deal with. And then, you know, as we go further along in time and the famine comes along 100 years later, it seems to be something that was in history but was shrouded in sort of a mystery. It would seem to me that it was a pretty rockin' place, or so it would seem. From the song, I can, you know, people only lived to be 30 or 40 years old back then. And because of that, they really rocked it up when they could, if they had their health and their strength about them. And people, just like they do now, just like people have always done. So I think eventually what happened is, I recall that in the 70s, when I was a teenager in Mallow, they got a festival called the Rakes of Mallow together, the Rakes of Mallow Dance Festival together. And I've been told by people, Ty Curtis, actually, one of the curators of the Mallow arts scene, he told me that some of the town elders weren't too pleased with calling the festival the Rakes of Mallow because of the implications of debauchery. This is in the 1970s. I thought it was fascinating that sort of like guilt or shame or whatever you want to call it would reach from the 1740s to the 1970s. I thought that was fascinating. You know, not that there was a lot to be ashamed of. I think even if you look at the video that we produced, the costumes we went for were pretty dandy. You know, people dressed up and they were dandies, you know, and you know, that's the thing I think I was kind of looking for there, to try and recreate that sort of thing that was going on there, and then people having fun in taverns and stuff. That's true of almost every town on both the islands of Britain and Ireland.
So now you should have a good idea of who the Rakes were and what Mallow was like around the 1700s, pre-famine Ireland. To elevate that a bit more, we should take a look at a clip from Hank's version of the Rakes of Mallow, titled "We Are the Rakes of Mallow." You've heard us talking about it now, but the video, in all honesty, really brings things together. Even Declan Sinnott had a part to play in the production of the song, but we'll get more into that later in the video. But first, let's have a look at the clip.
Bowing, belling, dancing, drinking, breaking windows, rising, sinking, ever breaking, never thinking, live the Rakes of Mallow. Living short but merry lives, going where the devil drives, having sweethearts, never wives, live the Rakes of Mallow.
Cayley, bandits, bikers, malls, cutie pies and baby dolls, loads of room for one and all among the Rakes of Mallow.
Living, striving forever, dream of Mallow. You won't be a rolling stone, they'll all make you feel at home. Not already till you to blow, make your way to Mallow. Still there is a town so sweet, where my love and I did meet. Hand in hand and down the street, we are the Rakes of Mallow. Mallow.
can you tell us a little bit about the creative side of it, yeah? So was there any factors or people who helped shape the song to what it became?
Well, as we've mentioned before about the song, it was in my mind for a long time to do something with it because I was really taken with the lyrics that Ned Lysett had written. I thought, wow, this is quite an interesting thing. And prior to the shutdowns of 2020, I had the idea of going to some of the hip hop kids in Mallow, getting it to them and see would they do something different with the idea. I couldn't go any further with that because of the shutdowns. And simultaneously, I started working with Declan. I said, look, I have this idea, I said. And he said, that's great. He said, if you're going to do it, you should do it like Thin Lizzy did it with Whiskey in the Jar. He reminisced about how, Thin Lizzy had done it and said they were going to do it. At the time, I guess in the early 70s, the Horselips were doing a lot of stuff like that. And there were other Irish bands that were taking sort of rock and roll values to Irish tunes. His idea was, you got to make it your own. It's got to be like nothing else that went before. And that's what led to it being somewhat personal to me. The opening verse and the last verse are sort of personal to me. We mixed them up with a modern version of the lyrics that Ned Lysett had written, basically. We turned it around and made it into something and gave it kind of a rock and roll edge to it. As you can tell, the guitars are pretty forward in the song.
I think this song is just class. The Rakes of Mallow itself is fairly catchy like anyway, because it's just so simple, it's easy to remember. And I won't lie, cooking dinner, driving to work, cleaning, I can't get the song out of my head recently especially. It's like it's being played in the room with me. But the song was just one thing. The video was on a whole other level. An absolute ton of effort went in by Hank and all involved in the song. So watching the video, and the video is great by the way, it features costumed 1750s dancers and multiple locations around the place. A ton of effort went into it. But what was the original idea for the video? And tell us a little bit about your experience doing it, and did anything stand out?
Well, I sought the advice of a fella from Mallow, a good friend of mine. He's an actor, Martin Lucy. He was in The Wind That Shakes the Barley. He had a part in that. And some of that was filmed in Mallow, by the way. And Martin and I talked about it. And I said, look, I'd really like to recreate the whole 1740s, 1750s vibe. And he said, well, you should go there to get the costumes and you should talk to this person to see about locations, and you should... so I have to give a lot of credit to Martin. I don't think it would have happened the way it happened, but for his advice. One of the things he told me was that out in Doneraile, there were two women in the Doneraile art troupe that are dancing in the video. There were two women, one of them dressed up, Catherine Murray dressed up. She dresses up as Queen Elizabeth I and sits in Doneraile Park and pretends that she's Elizabeth I, and she talks in a very archaic language, and she's like Queenie out of Blackadder. She sits there on summer days and the tourists can talk to her. And then Marion Quirk. And Marion dresses up as Lady Freemason. The first female Freemason was from Doneraile. She happened to listen into a Freemason meeting that was happening in Doneraile. And rather than execute her, they made her a Freemason. And it's quite a story within Freemasonry and in Doneraile. So Marion dresses up as Lady Freemason, and she tells the story about it. And it's kind of a tourist attraction. But it really attracted me. I thought, wow, these people are serious about dressing up. And with their guidance, basically, we got it together. You can see us all in sort of period costumes. And my idea was, I don't know how well we pulled it off. I think we pulled it off pretty well, was that I was to be abducted either in a dream or literally I was to be abducted and brought back to the 1740s to hang out with all the rakes in and around Mallow at that time. And you can see that from the beginning. That was the idea, that I was to be abducted and brought back. And then I guess Clodagh was calling me, in her section, was calling me back to the present. And it was to be displayed like that, actually, yeah. So that was kind of the idea. So I had this hallucination or a dream that I was hanging out with all the rakes, and yeah, you can see that in the video, I'm sure.
You really have to give them credit. The video is pure class. It's fun to watch, and it really paints the picture well. And I think they nailed it all in all. But it gets even better as well, because they were also essentially dropping in on an ABBA tribute concert dressed up in costume. Was there a moment when doing the video, like doing the filming on location or something like that, that you thought, this is exactly what I want? Like, what was going through your head at the time?
Yes, there was a moment. We were filming in Mallow Castle grounds. There was a ABBA tribute concert happening. And we, as Rakes, walked through the crowd while Declan and there was maybe someone else filming us as well. But when we got that footage where you can see me leading all the Rakes like ghosts through and I thought, wow, this is amazing. And people were delighted to see it as well, because they were there for an ABBA tribute concert, but there we were walking around pretending to be ghosts, and they were all in the video as well. And I thought, wow, this is great. Like it just seemed to be, it was a beautiful sunny day, and there was still restrictions with the lockdown and all that sort of thing on. And it was like a thing that we were doing, not so much in defiance of it, but we were very much continuing to live our lives, shall we say. It was wonderful. It was a sunny day. And I thought, this is great. This is what, there was definitely that was one of the points I thought, wow, I can't believe that.
It wasn't all just done by himself, like we were saying, okay? Loads of people worked on it together. And next we're going to chat about who they were and what they put into the song. Because there was a bit of modernization that had to be done with the lyrics, which was very important. And it really helped connect the Mallow today with Mallow back then, which I think was done really well. I really wanted to know about what the collaboration was like, especially keeping in mind that this was all done throughout the pandemic. And how did the collaboration with Declan Sinnott, Mary Green and Clodagh May come about?
Well, that's a three-pronged question, really. I know them all from different sets of circumstances. Declan's a little bit older than me. Mary Green's the same age as me, and Clodagh May is my niece, much younger than me, but they're all involved in music one way or the other. Declan is well known as a musician, guitar extraordinaire, producer extraordinaire, and he's worked with some incredible Irish folk acts that you and your audience know about already. People like Horselips, Moving Hearts, Mary Black, Christy Moore. He's worked with a lot of people, but he's been basically based in Cork for a lot of the past 40 years, I'll say. I started taking guitar lessons from Declan in 1985. When I was busking on the street, he had sort of shored up in Cork with his wife and family in the wake of Moving Hearts, shall we say, just before he kind of really got involved with Mary Black. And he was giving guitar lessons in Cork. The other guitarist in this band I had called Princess Street, a guy called Mick Garrity, and I used to go for lessons to him. And then subsequently, he would come and play with various rock bands in the city that I would have. Generally, what would happen with Declan, he'd come back from a tour with Mary Black, or this went on for a long time with Christy Moore, and he'd ring me up and he'd say, "You playing tonight?" "Yeah." "Where are you playing?" "Such and such a place." "Yeah." "Can I bring an amp?" "Yep." So like that, he would jump in and play with whatever kind of rock and roll band I'd had, because he does like to rock. He's a phenomenal guitar player, and he does like to rock it out. And there's probably plenty of people watching this that know that about him as well. Yeah, and eventually that led to him producing a lot of stuff that I've done over the years. Not everything I've done, but he's been involved in production. We've worked on various things. He produced my band Princess Street, and he was also involved. I was also in a band with him called Small Town Talk, which happened between about 2008 and 2011. And Declan produced that as well as playing it. And we played gigs around the place as well. And he produced my last album as well, What Happens in Cork, where the Rakes of Mallow is as well. So that's Declan. Mary Green is the same generation as I am. She's involved with her husband and her daughter in a wonderful family folk trio called Green Shine. She's married to Noel Shine, who's from the County Clare. She's from the County Waterford, but they've been living in Cork for a long time. Mary and I have written together over the years. She and I have done gigs together over the years, but it was really doing this album over the past few years, working with Declan, that she's singing on this album big time. And when it came to writing, shall we say, the female verse of the Rakes of Mallow, she was involved in that. I said, "Mary, could you make something with this?" Because the language of the original song, as we've discussed, was pretty archaic. I was in touch with Mary Green, and I said, "Look, I'd like if you could sort of like rejig these lines or think about what it would be like to sing these lines from the original by Ned Lysett in the 1750s. You'll notice if you compare the lyrics that I sing as the song starts to rock up, bowing, belling, dancing, drinking, breaking windows, rising, sinking, ever raking, never thinking, live the Rakes of Mallow. That's pretty much a straight lift from what Ned Lysett wrote. And spending faster than it comes, money doesn't walk, it runs. That's Declan's line, actually. Declan wrote that. Bacchus' true begotten sons are the Rakes of Mallow. Now, Bacchus was the god of wine in Roman mythology. Like Dionysian, Bacchanalian. It has to do with the drinking of wine and the having of a good time. So Bacchus' true begotten sons is God. So that's all pretty archaic, and I managed to get that in there. Changed around a little bit, but when I said it to Mary, I sent these lyrics to Mary, and they go like this. The female-focused lyrics from around the 1740s, 1750s. Ye nymphs depressed with want of rest and with complexion sallow, don't waste your prime with chalk or lime, but drink the springs at Mallow. All you that are both thin and bare, with scarce an ounce of tallow, to make your flesh be plump and fresh, come drink the springs at Mallow. And Mary got back to me the next day. She said, I can't sing that, she said. No one's going to understand that, she said. And I knew what she meant, you know? And what she wrote was fantastic. Mary wrote, like, she really brought it up to date. Hey girls, if your life's a mess and you need to ease your stress, put on your party dress and meet the gang at Mallow. And Kaylee, bandits, bikers, malls, cutie pies and baby dolls. There's room for one and all among the Rakes of Mallow. And Mary took it further, you know, in what she wrote. Next day you don't feel so hot. Might have been that extra shot. These are all things that are happening when people go out drinking now. They've seen worse or maybe not among the Rakes of Mallow. You know, so she brought it right up to date, and it was decided to give it to Clodagh to sing because Clodag's a little bit younger than us, and she got the whole idea pretty quick. So in terms of writing a song, it was the greatest fun and also really exciting and interesting. Like when Mary came back, I can't, there's no way you're going to be able to sing Even If It's Depressed with Want of Rest. That's not going to scan in this day and age. So what she wrote was really, really, really great. Clodagh May is my niece. She's the eldest daughter of my sister Maura. And she's not shy about coming forward and singing. She's a good big voice, and she's a great dancer. We decided she would be the girl to sing that verse in the Rakes of Mallow. We are the Rakes of Mallow. And it was great because I knew she could sing, but I didn't know if she had any recording experience. But she nailed it in about 2 takes. Declan was very, very happy with her. We're all very happy with her. And then at family gatherings and that, she was always very good to sing, and she has no problem fronting. So it was a natural choice, really.
The Rakes of Mallow, as we know, is usually played fairly quickly. It's clear that the song you put together had been slowed down to aid with singing and the likes of that. Did you face any challenges doing that, or did it make it easier?
We slowed it down. I don't know how conscious it was to slow it down, but it certainly became a thing. Well, if we're going to sing this, we're going to have to sing this in a way that's intelligible. So I think it needed to be slowed down. That's what happened with it. So instead of being sort of a fast sort of Irish polka or something, well, the whole thing about slowing it down was to make it so that we could sing it and get all the words in and make them intelligible and tell the story that the song is telling. Usually when it's played, when you hear it, no matter who's doing it, it's at a fair clip. And it was just decided along the way that we wouldn't necessarily play the whole tune in the song, but we'd let the tune and the arrangement around the chords of the tune influence the singing of it. Because like if you, even the start off of it is once there was a town so sweet. That's the slowed down version of da 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 da. So we slowed it down so that we could sing the story around it. And it was kind of deemed that we wouldn't play the actual tune in it. Now, 2 things about that. There's a songwriter here based in Cork. His name is John Spillane, a great songwriter. I know John a long time. He's written songs for all kinds of people, Christy Moore in particular. And he has his own career going on as well, his own singing career. He said, you slowed that song down, Hank, and made it possible to sing. And I was delighted to hear that because I really do respect him as a songwriter. He's written a couple of songs about Mallow as well, which are worth looking up. He wrote a song called Lover's Leap. And anyone that's watching this should look up Lover's Leap by John Spillane. That's another story. Maybe you can get in touch with John and talk to him about his song. There you go, John. In any case, it was decided that we wouldn't play the actual tune in it, that we'd just let the tune inspire what we were going to sing, the melody of what we were going to sing. But now, when I play live with the band, Sean Long, the guy who plays the guitar in the band I have now, band I call Down in the City, named after the Sonny Condell song. Sean actually does play the melody when we play live, and it's a lot of fun. So that when you're playing something live, it's different from doing the recording, as you know.
So I wanted to know also just a little bit more about Hank to understand the production behind the song We Are the Rakes of Mallow. Who were his musical influences? What was it like growing up in the United States and County Cork? Understanding this for me really helped to connect the dots as to, why his version of the Rakes of Mallow sounds the way it does. And do you want to tell us a little bit about your musical influences over the years? You grew up between the United States and Ireland, so the music scenes would surely be different. That must have shaped you as a musician, and in turn, your version of the Rakes of Mallow. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Having been born in the United States and then grew up there till I was 11, also having the roots in Ireland, specifically for me, what happened was when I was very young, I got turned on to the Beatles and Bob Dylan. That's standard enough for a lot of people. When I came to Mallow in 1971, I was 8 years old. We were just on a family holiday at that time. In 1971, I remember my mother and father went to see the Dubliners play in Cork while we were there. And there was music. It seems in the distant mist of time, there was music almost every night, sing-songs, people playing guitars, fiddles, mandolins, and this was all around me. And I was determined then when I came back from Ireland in 71 that I would get guitar lessons, and I started getting guitar lessons when I was 9 years old in 1972 in New York. And then when we moved back here in 74 permanently, again, just there was music everywhere, all kinds of music, Irish traditional music. And I also became very aware of the Irish rock and roll scene. I like to say sometimes, instead of getting the Ramones and Aerosmith, I got the Undertones and Thin Lizzy. When I moved here in 74, if I'd stayed in New York, I would have got the Ramones and Aerosmith. But when I came to Mallow, I ended up getting the Undertones and Thin Lizzy and Rory Gallagher. Truth be told, I'm more of a rock and roller than anything else, but I do, since I've made a life in music, I understand the connection between American, say, bluegrass and folk tradition and songwriting and Irish traditional music and songwriting. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, a guy called Ricky Lynch. He's a huge Bob Dylan fan, as am I. Bob's actually playing tonight in Killarney for the first time. I won't be going because I'm playing in Limerick. But we were talking about, the effect of the Clancy brothers had on Bob Dylan. That's something that always is fascinating to me. If you hear Liam Clancy talk about Bob, but he, it's all there. He's as much as Bob was influenced by the Clancy brothers, as much as he was influenced by Woody Guthrie or anything else, So I find that endlessly fascinating in terms of writing songs and creating.
And with thousands of gigs behind you, what moment might have stood out to you from all of that? One of, let's say, your most memorable live moments?
I think without a doubt, the most interesting thing that ever happened playing live was to be on a TV show in Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan, singing a song I wrote about Maiden's Tower. The Maiden's Tower overlooks the Caspian Sea, and I wrote this song about it after being out there one year playing for St. Patrick's Day, and I was brought out the following year, and it's all on video to see. I'm sure you'll put the video in your description, and it's me singing this song called Maiden's Tower, and the chorus goes, "No one's ever taken Maiden's Tower. In all the wars out there in that region, no one has ever taken the Maiden's Tower, and they're very proud of it out there. And it's a pre-Islamic structure." Now, we're in Spinal Tap territory here. Actually, no one knows what they were doing. No, but it was a pre-Islamic structure, and it was a fortress. And it was fascinating, the story. And I just wrote this song about going out there and sort of imagining what it was like to be out there way back. Actually, of all my songs, I think that Maiden's Tower song is kind of related to We Are the Rakes of Mallow in terms of going back into history and trying to write something about it. But I ended up on a TV show, let me see, I pronounce the name properly now, singing this song, Maiden's Tower, with a Mugam singer Mugam singer, for want of a better phrase, is like their Shanos, except it's pretty wild, right? It's the locals singing out there in that region, in that Persian region. Azerbaijan was once part of Persia, Iran, and all that sort of stuff. And it's a wild sort of singing, Mugam. And I ended up doing a duet with Gulyanag Mamadova. And you can see the video, and it's pretty wild. And it's all lights and whistles and stuff. And I'm there in a leather jacket and a bad haircut, and I'm singing this way, and she's dancing, and she's just wailing over it. And while I was doing it, I was like, oh my goodness, what have I, like that scene in the Rakes of Mallow. I'm in the middle of something here now that I've created, and it's pretty wild. So it was 2006, 2007. That's probably that definitely is one of the most, maybe the most memorable thing I've done in terms of just all of a sudden I've created this thing, and all of a sudden I'm on a TV show. I mean, the next day in downtown Baku, taxi driver's like, you were on television last night. No. So it was pretty wild like that.
So you're walking around Baku in Azerbaijan, and suddenly you're getting recognized by taxi drivers. There's definitely worse reasons to get recognised by taxi drivers. It could have been a rough night out in Mallow and a dodgy 3-in-1. For those that don't know, a 3-in-1 is what you can get from most Chinese takeaways in Ireland. They're absolutely gorgeous sometimes. Chips, curry and fried rice mixed together in a little tin tray. It's absolutely lovely, but sometimes it can go wrong after a rough night. I'm not talking from personal experience here as well. It was a friend that told me this. Anyway, this project to me really seemed to go well. But not only musically, but for the local area of Mallow as well. You got to think about it that way. It's showcasing the history of what everyday life would have been like for people back then. And as well as that, just like loads of other folk songs, it's a window into our past. So I had to ask Hank, would he be planning on working on other projects like this? I was genuinely curious to find out, and what this project or song also meant to him. And do you see this song as a wider series of songs, or was it a unique once-off thing?
I can't see myself picking another period of Irish history and writing a song about it, but that could change too. I could see myself working with some of the people to make another video or to do something artistically with them, but not specifically to write a song about another. I wouldn't pretend to know anything more about, unless I did some sort of research on that. But I think this is kind of a one-off, but I would definitely work with the people artistically again in the studio, making a record or the video. I met some really great people, especially from Doneraile and the dancers. And it was a wonderful opportunity for me to meet sort of the younger people in Mallow through Clodagh that were dancing in it. And just to sort of connect with the town like that again after all these years.
Given your base in Cork and your childhood connections to Mallow, what does this song mean to you personally?
To do the song was something that was on my mind for a very long time. Then with the events of the lockdown and working with Declan in between lockdowns, my mother passing, it just seemed to complete some sort of circle for me personally. You can see at some point in the video early on, there's a line that goes, now I look around the town, ghosts that can't be found. There's an image of my mother and my auntie as young women in Mallow. So I was glad to get that in there in the video. And then at the very end of the video, my wife and I make an appearance. It's sort of like, we met very young in Mallow. That's the last sort of scene in it, where she's coming out of a shop in Mallow, a real old-fashioned sweet shop, if you look at it. Keeps, it's called. It meant a lot personally for me to kind of pay tribute to the town. Like that's from the start to finish. I worked in the sugar factory. I worked in the beet factory. I pulled beet when I was a teenager in the fields around Mallow, and I worked in the sugar factory in Mallow as well. It's gone now, completely gone, like all the sugar factories. In many ways, I was able to pay tribute to the town I grew up in after I moved from New York, and I was able to pay tribute to my mother and my family life that's emanated from Mallow. So yeah, and I'm friends as well. I mean, you can see all those people that are in the video, if they're not related to me, they're my friends. And I had just as much fun as anybody in Mallow when I was a younger man. So yeah, definitely it means a lot to me to have done that, to have paid tribute like that to the town, because it just seemed to be like the words that got me, when I finally found the words, the full verses, the male verses and the female verses, I thought something's got to be done with this. So I managed to get it together.
A huge shout out to all of the people who have supported the channel over the last year. Thanks a million for joining, and I'm so glad to have you all here. But look, I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you all have a great week. Slán the full. Cheers.